Sign the papers, or I will destroy your legacy. That was the ultimatum my wife of 40 years gave me over dinner. She wanted my $5.5 million penthouse. She wanted my art collection. She wanted everything I had built from the ground up since I was a young man fighting for respect on the streets of Chicago. She thought she had me cornered. She thought that by forcing me out, she had won the jackpot. I looked at her. I looked at my entitled son-in-law smirking across the table, and I signed. I picked up my keys and walked out without a fight. They thought I was defeated. They had no idea that I did not just sign a property deed. I signed their financial death warrant because that penthouse was not just a luxury home. It was a machine, and I was the only one who knew how to keep the engine from exploding. 24 hours later, her own lawyer would be screaming at her through the phone, asking if she realized what she had just done. But by then, it was too late. Before I tell you how I turned their greed into their prison, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson they would never forget. The sound of a cork popping echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. It was a 1985 Chateau Margaux, a bottle I had been saving for my 75th birthday. I had not given anyone permission to touch it, but there sat Preston, my son-in-law, with his feet propped up on my antique coffee table, pouring the dark red liquid into a glass as if it were cheap soda. He did not even bother to let it breathe. Preston was a man who knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing. He was 35 years old with a mediocre career in day trading and a taste for luxury that his wallet could never support. He swirled the wine in the glass and looked at me with that casual arrogance that made my blood boil. "Nice view you have got here, Eli, really nice." He did not call me Dad. He did not call me Mr. Banks. Just Eli. As if we were drinking buddies. As if he had earned the right to sit in the sky and look down on the city of Chicago. I cut my steak slowly. The knife scraped against the porcelain. I am 71 years old. I have spent my life designing skyscrapers that define this city's skyline. I fought tooth and nail to be taken seriously as a black architect in the 70s. I built this penthouse with my own hands. I designed every beam, every window, every hidden ventilation shaft. It was my sanctuary, and now it felt like a hotel lobby where the guests had overstayed their welcome. My daughter Nia sat next to Preston. She looked down at her plate, avoiding my eyes. She looked tired, or maybe just guilty. Nia was my only child. I loved her, but I could see her mother's influence in her. She wanted the lifestyle, but she did not want the work. She had married Preston because he looked the part of a wealthy man, even if he was hollow inside. Vivian cleared her throat. The sound was sharp and deliberate. She did not eat. She just watched me. Vivian was beautiful once. She was the woman who had stood by me when I was working 18-hour days. But somewhere along the way, the money became more important than the man. She had grown accustomed to the galas, the charity balls, the status. She loved being Mrs. Banks. She just did not love Mr. Banks anymore. She reached under the table and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She slapped it onto the table right next to my unfinished dinner. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is this, Vivian?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The energy in the room shifted. The air grew cold. Preston put his glass down and smirked. He knew what was coming. Vivian smoothed her dress and looked me dead in the eye. "It is time, Eli. We are done pretending. These are divorce papers and a settlement agreement." I picked up the document. I flipped through the pages. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, but the numbers jumped out at me. She was demanding everything: the penthouse, the vacation home in the Hamptons, and most painfully, the Harlem Renaissance art collection, my Jacob Lawrence paintings, my Romar Bearden collages, pieces of history that I had collected for decades, pieces that represented my soul. I chuckled dryly. "You want the art, Vivian. You hate that art. You called it depressing last week." Vivian sipped her water. "I do not care about the art, Eli. But Preston says it is worth a fortune. It will make a nice nest egg for Nia and the grandchildren." I looked at Nia. She flinched. So that was it. They were stripping me for parts. I put the papers down. "And if I refuse? If I drag this to court?" Vivian leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. A dangerous serpent-like hiss. "Then I will release the file on the 1990 Millennium Tower project." I froze. The Millennium Tower was one of my first major projects. There had been a rumor back then, a vicious lie that I had cut corners on the structural steel to save money. It was never true. I had been exonerated by 3 independent commissions. But in the court of public opinion, the truth does not matter. Vivian continued. I have a statement prepared, Eli. I will tell the press that you confessed to me privately, that you knew the building was unsafe. At your age, a scandal like that will not just ruin your reputation, it will destroy your legacy. They will take your license, they will take your awards. You will die a fraud in the history books. I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the greed in her eyes, I saw the desperation. She was 65 years old and terrified of losing her social standing. She needed my money to keep up appearances, but she did not want me. I looked at Preston. He was checking his watch as if boring of the conversation. Come on, Pops, just sign it. You are retired anyway. You do not need a place this big. Nia and I can actually use it to entertain clients. We can modernize it, get rid of all this old, dusty junk. He waved his hand at my bookshelves. My heart hardened. It turned into something cold and solid like the steel beams I used to weld. They saw a $5.5 million asset. They saw a piggy bank. They did not see the home. And they certainly did not understand the building. This penthouse was unique. I had designed it as the lungs of the entire 40-story tower. It housed the central HVAC exchange, the hydraulic pressure systems for the upper floors, and the server nodes for the smart home grid. It required maintenance. Specialized specific maintenance that cost a fortune if you did not know how to do it yourself. I had handled it personally for 20 years. I calibrated the pressure valves every Sunday. I reset the digital keys every month. I kept the beast tamed. To Vivian and Preston, it was just walls and floors. To me, it was a living, breathing machine, and they were about to fire the engineer. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my fountain pen, the one Naya had given me for Father's Day 10 years ago, back when she still looked at me with pride. I uncapped it slowly. Are you sure about this, Vivian? I asked one last time. I am giving you a chance to walk away from this madness. Take the alimony. Take the lake house. Leave the penthouse and the art. Vivian laughed. A harsh barking sound. Do not try to negotiate, Eli. You have no leverage. Sign the papers. Or I make the call to the Times in 10 minutes. I looked at Nia. Anything to say, daughter? Nia bit her lip and looked away. I am sorry, Dad, but Preston thinks it is for the best. We need the security. Security! I almost laughed out loud. They were trading a diamond for a hand grenade and they did not even know the pin was pulled. I looked down at the signature line. Transfer of title. Transfer of all assets. Irrevocable. I remembered the clause in the building bylaws, the one I wrote myself back in 1982. The owner of the penthouse is designated as the technical manager of the building infrastructure. It meant the owner was personally responsible for the upkeep of the central systems, not the condo association. The owner. I signed my name. Elijah Washington Banks. The ink flowed black and permanent onto the white paper. I signed away the deed. I signed away the art. I signed away the view of the city I loved, but I also signed away the responsibility. Here. I slid the papers across the table. It is yours, all of it. Vivian snatched the papers as if she feared I would change my mind. She checked the signature and smiled, a smile of pure victory. You made the right choice, Eli. You have 24 hours to vacate. Preston cheered and poured himself another glass of my wine. Finally. We are going to gut this living room first thing Monday. Open up the floor plan. It is too gloomy in here. I stood up. I did not shout. I did not flip the table. I adjusted my tie and buttoned my suit jacket. I will not need 24 hours. I am leaving now. I walked to the hallway. My bags were already packed. I had known this day was coming. A man does not live with a shark for 40 years without learning to watch the water. I picked up the only thing that mattered to me, a small wooden box on the mantel, the ashes of my dog Buster. Where are you going? Nia asked. Her voice trembled slightly. Now that the deed was done, the guilt was starting to creep in. I put on my coat and my hat. I am going to find a place where I can breathe, Nia. You have your security now. Enjoy it. I walked to the front door. On the wall was the master control panel for the smart home system. It controlled everything, the heating, the cooling, the security shutters, the water pressure. It was password protected. Vivian and Preston had never bothered to learn how it worked. They just shouted commands at the voice assistant. I typed in a sequence of numbers. It was not the alarm code. It was a command I had programmed years ago for catastrophic system failure. It was the factory reset and manual override lock. The screen flashed red for a second, then went black. The hum of the ventilation system died down instantly. The ambient lights flickered and went to a default cold white setting. "What did you just do?" Preston called out from the dining room. I opened the door. The cold Chicago wind hit my face. It felt like freedom. I did not look back. I just walked out into the hallway and let the heavy steel door click shut behind me. I heard the electronic lock engage, a solid, heavy thud. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The doorman Henry looked at me with concern. "Mr. Banks, you are leaving so late." I handed him an envelope. "Henry, inside this envelope is my resignation as the technical manager of the building. Please file it with the board tomorrow morning. And Henry, if anyone from the Penthouse calls asking for help with the systems, tell them to call a contractor. I am retired." Henry nodded confusingly but took the envelope. I walked out onto the street. I hailed a cab. The city lights blurred in the reflection of the window. I had lost my home. I had lost my collection. But as the taxi pulled away, I checked my watch. The countdown had begun. Without my daily calibration, the pressure in the radiant heating pipes would start to rise in about 12 hours. The smart glass windows would default to open mode if the server did not receive a handshake signal in 20 hours. And the first bill for the mandatory structural maintenance tax would arrive in the mail in 3 days. They wanted to be the owners. Well, now they were. Every nut, every bolt, and every bill. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in 40 years, I slept soundly. I did not know that while I was sleeping, my phone was blowing up with missed calls. The chaos had started sooner than I expected. Let me take you back into that dining room. 10 minutes before I walked out into the cold Chicago night. 10 minutes before I reset the building's brain. The papers were still sitting there on the mahogany table between the half-eaten steak and the stolen wine. The air was thick with the smell of expensive cologne and betrayal. Preston took another sip of my vintage Chateau Margaux. He swirled it around his mouth loudly, making a show of tasting it. He leaned back in my leather chair, the chair I had bought to celebrate my first major architectural award in 1995, and looked at me with a pitying smile. "You know, Eli," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We are actually doing you a favor. Look at this place. It is dark. It is heavy. It feels like a museum for a culture that, well, let's just say it is a bit intense for the modern market." He gestured vaguely at the walls adorned with the masterpieces of the Harlem Renaissance I had spent 40 years collecting. The vibrant, chaotic energy of the Jazz Age captured in oil and canvas. The struggles and triumphs of my ancestors staring down at this mediocre man in a designer suit. Preston continued, emboldened by my silence. "This penthouse has potential. Serious potential. But it needs a new vision, a lighter touch, something cleaner, more European. It needs a white owner who knows how to make it sophisticated. Not this cluttered ethnic look." The room went deadly silent. The insult hung in the air like smoke. It was not just a critique of my decor. It was a dismissal of my existence. He was telling me that my blackness was a stain on the property value, that my history was debris to be cleared away to make room for his beige minimalist fantasy. I looked at Nia, my daughter, the girl I had carried on my shoulders to watch the Bud Billiken parade, the girl whose hair I had braided on Sunday mornings when Vivian was too busy with her social clubs. I waited for her to speak. I waited for the fire I knew was in her blood. I waited for her to tell her husband that he was disrespecting the man who paid for the very clothes on his back. Naya did not look up. She stared at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with a manicured fingernail. She shrank into herself. Her silence was louder than Preston's words. It was a physical blow. In that moment, I realized I had not just lost my wife. I had lost my child. She had chosen the path of least resistance. She had chosen the illusion of status over the reality of dignity. Vivian tapped a manicured finger on the document. "Enough chit-chat. The ink is drying, Eli. Sign the papers so we can all move on. You are making this awkward." I looked at Vivian. Then I looked at Preston. A strange calm washed over me. It was the same calm I felt when I stood on the steel skeleton of a skyscraper in a high wind. The calm of knowing exactly where the load-bearing stress points were, and knowing exactly how to bring the whole thing down if necessary. They thought they were the predators. They thought I was the prey. They did not know they were standing in a trap I had designed years ago. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out my reading glasses. I put them on slowly, deliberately. I pulled the heavy stack of legal documents toward me. Preston sighed theatrically, rolling his eyes. "Oh, come on. Do not pretend you are going to read the fine print now. It is standard boilerplate." Vivian's lawyer drew it up. "It just says, you give us the house and we promise not to put you in a nursing home just yet." He chuckled at his own joke. Nia flinched but still said nothing. I ignored him. I turned the pages. 1, 2, 10. I was looking for something specific. I knew it was there because I knew Vivian's lawyer, Mr. Miller. 20 years ago, Miller was a hungry young associate I had hired to handle some zoning disputes for the city. I had taught him a few things about contract law that they do not teach in school, specifically the art of the poison pill, a clause buried so deep in technical jargon that arrogance blinds you to it. When Vivian hired him to divorce me, Miller probably thought he was betraying his old mentor for a big payout. He probably thought I was too old to notice, or maybe just maybe he remembered who taught him the game. I found it on page 42, section 14, paragraph B, subsection 3. It was written in dense, impenetrable legalese. To the untrained eye, it looked like a standard liability waiver. But to an architect and a developer, it was a death sentence. The clause read, "Upon transfer of title, the grantee assumes full and immediate responsibility for all structural, mechanical, and systemic maintenance obligations as defined in the original 1982 building charter, specifically regarding the technical manager designation of the Penthouse unit." They did not know what the technical manager designation meant. They thought it was just a fancy title for the owner. I knew what it meant. It meant that the owner of the Penthouse was not just a resident. They were the legal guardian of the entire tower's infrastructure, the water pumps, the elevators, the heating grid. And if those systems failed, the technical manager was personally liable for the repairs, not the condo board, the owner. And I knew for a fact that the main boiler in the basement was 3 days away from a mandatory 10-year overhaul, cost $200,000. I also knew the facade inspection was due next month, cost another $300,000. By signing this paper, I was not giving them a $5.5 million asset. I was handing them a liability that would bankrupt them in 6 months. I looked up at Preston. "You really want this, Preston? You want to be the man of the house?" Preston smirked. "I was born to be the man of this house, Eli. Just sign." I uncapped my pen. The gold nib glinted in the chandelier light. "Very well," I said softly. I pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound was the only noise in the room. I signed my name with a flourish. Elijah Washington Banks. I pushed the papers back across the table. Done. Vivian snatched them up immediately, clutching them to her chest like a winning lottery ticket. Her eyes sparkled with greed. She did not check page 42. She just checked the signature line. "Perfect," she breathed. Finally. Preston stood up and clapped his hands. "All right, that wasn't so hard, was it, Pops? Now, if you'll excuse us, we have some celebrating to do. You should probably get going. The movers are coming at 8 a.m. I stood up slowly. My knees popped, but I kept my back straight. I adjusted my suit jacket. I did not look at the view of the city I helped build. I did not look at the art I loved. I looked at the fireplace. On the mantel sat a simple wooden box. It was scarred and scratched. It was the urn containing the ashes of Buster, my golden retriever, who had died 3 years ago. Buster was the only living thing in this house that had ever looked at me with unconditional love. He did not care about my money. He did not care about my status. He just wanted to be near me. I walked over to the mantel. My footsteps echoed on the marble floor. I picked up the box. It felt warm in my hand. "What are you doing?" Vivian asked sharply. "You can't take anything. The contract says contents included." I turned to face her. My voice was low and steady. "The contract says you get the art, the furniture, and the fixtures. This is not furniture. This is family. Something you people know nothing about." Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Fine. Take the dead dog. Just get out." I tucked the box under my arm. I walked toward the door. As I passed Nia, she finally looked up. Her eyes were wet with tears. "Daddy," she whispered. I stopped. I looked down at her. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. But that would be a lie. It was not going to be okay. She had made her bed and now the roof was about to collapse on it. I did not say goodbye. Goodbye implies I might see them again. I simply walked past her. I reached the heavy oak double doors. I paused. I turned back one last time. Preston was already pouring another glass of wine, laughing at something Vivian said. They looked like royalty. They looked invincible. I looked at the walls. I looked at the ceiling where the hidden sensors were blinking silently, waiting for my command. Good luck with the building, I said. My voice carried across the room, cutting through their laughter. Preston looked up annoyed. What is that supposed to mean? I smiled. A genuine cold smile. It means this place has a soul, Preston, and it does not like strangers. I opened the door and walked out. Behind me, I heard Preston laugh. Crazy old man, he muttered. I closed the door. The latch clicked shut with a sound finality. A heavy metallic thud that signaled the end of my life as a husband and father, and the beginning of my life as the executioner of their financial future. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. I pressed the button. As I waited, I pulled out my phone. I saw the app for the smart home system. The icon was green, indicating all systems were normal. I remembered the look on Preston's face, the arrogance, the racism masked as aesthetic critique. I remembered Nia's silence. I remembered Vivian's greed. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, cutting me off from the penthouse floor forever, I opened the app. I went to the settings menu. I scrolled down to the bottom, to the red button labeled Factory Reset Emergency Override. I did not hesitate. I did not tremble. I pressed it. The screen flashed red. System resetting. All user preferences deleted. Security protocols disengaged. Environmental controls set to default. I put the phone back in my pocket. The elevator began its descent. By the time I reached the lobby, the heating in the penthouse would turn off, the automated blinds would retract, and the water pressure sensors would reset to 0, triggering a safety shutoff for the hot water. They wanted to be cold. They were about to freeze. I stepped out into the lobby, gave my resignation to Henry the doorman, and walked out into the night. The wind was biting, but I didn't feel it. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The war had begun, and I had just fired the first shot without them even hearing the bang. The suitcase on the bed was made of worn brown leather. It was the same bag I had carried when I arrived in Chicago 45 years ago. Back then, it held everything I owned, which wasn't much. Just 2 shirts, a drafting compass, and a dream that was too big for a black boy from Alabama. Now, as I packed it for the last time, it seemed to hold the weight of an entire lifetime. I folded my shirts with mechanical precision. I did not rush. I wanted to remember this room. I wanted to remember the way the moonlight hit the floorboards I had laid with my own hands. You have to understand something about this building. When I bought the shell in 1978, it was a rotting skeleton. The city had condemned it. People called it a vertical coffin. They laughed when I signed the deed. They said Elijah Banks has lost his mind. They said a black architect could never restore a landmark like this. But I saw something they did not. I saw the bones. I saw the steel lattice structure that was ahead of its time. I spent 10 years of my life sleeping on a cot in the basement, breathing in drywall dust and asbestos just to bring this place back to life. I designed the penthouse not as a crown, but as a brain. The ventilation shafts for the entire 40-story tower converge here. The hydraulic pumps that maintain water pressure for 300 families below run through the utility closet in my study. The server rack that manages the smart grid for the elevators is hidden behind the false wall in the hallway. I lived here because the building needed a captain. It was a living, breathing organism, and I was the only one who knew how to listen to its heartbeat. Now, they were treating it like a dead asset. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was sharp like a zipper closing on a body bag. I picked it up and walked out into the hallway. The noise from the living room was jarring. It had only been 20 minutes since I signed the papers, but the demolition had already begun mentally, if not physically. I saw a contractor standing there, a man I did not recognize. He was holding a laser measuring device. Preston was pointing at the wall of my study, my sanctuary, the room where I had drafted the blueprints for the city library and the new hospital wing. "We are going to blow this wall out," Preston was saying, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I want an open concept gym here, floor-to-ceiling mirrors, a juice bar in the corner, and we need to rip out that ugly mahogany paneling. It makes the room look like a funeral home." I stopped. My grip tightened on the handle of my suitcase. That mahogany paneling was not decorative. It was acoustic dampening material I had installed to silence the hum of the high-velocity HVAC turbines that ran directly behind that wall. If they ripped it out, the noise in that room would be like standing inside a jet engine. I considered warning them. I considered walking over there and explaining that the ugly wall was the only thing keeping the room habitable. But then I looked at Vivian. She was standing by the window holding a glass of champagne. She was laughing at something the contractor said. She looked younger, lighter, as if shedding me was the best beauty treatment she had ever received. She saw me standing there. The laughter died in her throat, but the smirk remained. "Oh, good, you are packed. I was afraid we would have to call security to escort you. Make sure you leave your key fob on the table." I walked past them. I moved with the slow, deliberate gait of a man who knows the structural integrity of the floor beneath his feet. I did not look at Preston. I did not look at the contractor who was unknowingly planning to expose a dangerous turbine system. I stopped at the main console near the front door. It was a sleek black glass panel flush with the wall. To anyone else, it was just a thermostat and a light switch. To me, it was the nervous system of the tower. Preston called out from the living room. "Hey, Eli, don't touch the settings. We like the temperature just where it is." I didn't answer. I wasn't changing the temperature. I was changing the soul of the house. I tapped the screen. It woke up with a soft blue glow. I entered the technician menu. It required a 6-digit code, a code only I knew. I punched in the numbers, 1978. The year I bought the building, 42. The number of years I had been married to the woman who just betrayed me. The screen flashed a warning, caution. Factory reset initiated. All custom protocols will be erased. System will revert to manual oversight. Are you sure I looked at the warning? Custom protocols. That is what they called the thousands of hours of coding I had written to make this building livable. The code that told the heaters to adjust for the wind chill coming off Lake Michigan. The code that told the water pumps to increase pressure at 6 a.m. when everyone was showering. The code that automatically balanced the humidity to protect the hardwood floors. I was the ghost in the machine, and they had just exorcised me. I pressed confirm. The blue light on the panel turned to a dull neutral gray. The soft, almost imperceptible hum of the air filtration system stopped instantly. The lights, which had been tuned to a warm amber hue to mimic candlelight, flickered once and turned a harsh, sterile white. The apartment suddenly felt dead. The silence was heavy. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a machine that had been unplugged. What happened? Vivian's voice drifted from the living room. Why did the lights change? Preston's voice followed. Probably just a surge. I'll figure it out later. The system is probably just adjusting to the new owners. I almost smiled. Adjusting. They had no idea. The system wasn't adjusting. It had quit. The smart blinds, which tracked the sun to prevent the greenhouse effect in the afternoon, were now frozen. The floor heating, which anticipated the temperature drop at night, was now off. The building was now just a pile of bricks and glass waiting for orders that would never come. I placed my key fob on the console table. It made a hollow clatter. I opened the heavy front door. The draft from the hallway hit me. Usually the positive pressure system I designed kept the hallway air from entering the unit. But that system was off now. The smell of the hallway floor wax and old dust wafted in. I stepped over the threshold. "Goodbye, Vivian," I said softly. She didn't hear me. She was too busy toasting to her new life. I closed the door. I heard the electronic lock engage, but it sounded different this time. Clunky. Mechanical. Without the magnetic assist, it was just a deadbolt. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button and waited. Usually the elevator would be waiting for me, anticipating my departure based on my movement sensors. Today, I had to wait. As I stood there, I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. I had spent 40 years holding this building up, carrying the weight of its steel and its systems on my shoulders. I had worried about every crack, every leak, every vibration. Now it wasn't my problem. The elevator arrived with a ding that sounded surprisingly hollow. I stepped in and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, I closed my eyes. I pictured the turbine behind the study wall. Without the active noise cancellation protocol I had just deleted, it would start to vibrate in about 4 hours. By tomorrow morning, the peaceful yoga room Preston wanted would sound like the inside of a washing machine. I descended 40 floors, down past the lives of the people who lived in my creation. They were sleeping safely because for now the inertia of my systems was holding. But soon the entropy would set in. I walked out through the lobby. Henry the doorman was not there. It was the night shift relief, a young kid on his phone. He didn't even look up as I dragged my suitcase across the marble floor. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The Chicago wind was brutal. It cut through my coat, but it felt clean. I looked up at the tower one last time. From the street it looked majestic. A pillar of light and glass reaching for the stars. My masterpiece. But as I watched, I saw the lights in the penthouse flicker again. Just once. Like a dying heartbeat. The building knew I was gone. I hailed a taxi. The driver was an older man with kind eyes. Where to, he asked. I gave him the address of the small studio apartment I had rented in Hyde Park. It was a modest place. No smart systems, no views, just 4 walls and a window. The driver pulled away from the curb. I watched the Millennium Tower recede in the rearview mirror. Vivian wanted the penthouse. She wanted the status. She wanted the shell. She never understood that a shell is useless without the ghost that makes it work. She had the keys now, but she didn't have the code. And as the taxi turned the corner, disappearing into the traffic of the night, I whispered to the empty air, "Good luck with the pressure valves, Preston. You're going to need it." My new apartment in Hyde Park was exactly 400 square feet. It was a single room with a kitchenette, a small bathroom, and a window that looked out onto a brick alleyway. There was no marble flooring, no smart glass windows, no voice-activated climate control. Just a radiator that clanked in the mornings and a hardwood floor that creaked when I walked on it. And I absolutely loved it. For the first time in decades, my life was simple. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I had to check the structural sensors of a skyscraper, but because I wanted to watch the sun rise over the lake. I put on my running shoes and jogged along the shore. The cold air filled my lungs and I felt a vitality I thought I had lost years ago. In the penthouse, my life had been a series of maintenance tasks masked as luxury. Every room had a demand. Every system had a potential failure point. Here in this studio, my biggest problem was deciding which book to read from the stack I had picked up at the local library. I made my own coffee and a French press. I sat by the window and watched the world go by. I was no longer Elijah Banks, the renowned architect and building manager. I was just a man drinking coffee. But across town in the glass tower I had left behind, the beast was waking up, and it was hungry. I did not need to see it to know what was happening. I knew the physics of that building better than I knew my own body. Without the daily calibration, the radiant heating system in the penthouse floor would begin to lose pressure. The thermal fluid that kept the marble warm would start to cool and thicken. It started on a Tuesday morning just 3 days after I left. I was at the grocery store buying apples when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Henry the doorman. "Mr. Banks. Sorry to bother you. Mrs. Banks is screaming at the maintenance crew in the lobby. She says the floor is freezing. They are asking for the schematics." I looked at the message and felt a twinge of satisfaction. It wasn't malice. It was just the inevitable result of arrogance. They had kicked out the engineer and expected the machine to keep running on magic. I didn't reply. I put my phone back in my pocket and continued shopping. I bought a bag of red apples and a loaf of sourdough bread. The simple pleasures. Back at the penthouse, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. I learned the details later from my old contacts in the building management office. Apparently, Preston had woken up at 6 a.m. to step onto the bathroom floor and found it ice cold. Not just cool, but stone cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones. He had stormed into the living room only to find that the ambient temperature had dropped to 60 degrees. The smart thermostat on the wall was flashing a red error code. Error 404. Pressure valve sink failure. Manual override required. Preston, being Preston, assumed he could fix it by shouting at it. He tapped the screen furiously, leaving greasy fingerprints on the glass. When that didn't work, he called the building superintendent, a nice guy named Carl who had been working there for 5 years. Carl came up, took one look at the panel, and shook his head. "I can't touch this, Mr. Walsh. This is a custom system. Mr. Banks designed it himself using industrial parts from Germany. We don't even have the tools to open the access panel." Preston had exploded. "What do you mean you don't have the tools? You are the maintenance guy. Fix it." Carl had just shrugged. "I am the maintenance guy for the standard unit, sir. This penthouse is..." Well, it is a spaceship sitting on top of an apartment building. Only Mr. Banks knows how to fly it. You need to call him. But they didn't want to call me. Not yet. Their pride was still too strong. So Preston did what all arrogant men do. He threw money at the problem. He called the most expensive HVAC company in Chicago. 2 technicians arrived in a shiny van. They hauled their equipment up 40 floors. They walked into the utility room where the heart of the system beat. They spent 2 hours banging on pipes looking at the complex web of valves and sensors I had installed. I can imagine the scene perfectly. They probably stared at the hydro-pneumatic manifold I had custom fabricated in 1985. It didn't look like anything in their textbooks. It looked like something from a submarine. Finally, the lead technician walked out, wiping grease from his hands. Look, lady, I don't know what to tell you. This isn't a normal heating system. It is hooked into the towers, main water return, but it has a secondary loop that runs through a pressure equalizer. I have never seen anything like it. If I turn the wrong valve, I could blow a pipe and flood the 3 floors below you. I am not touching it. But we are freezing, Vivian had shrieked, wrapping her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders. Then buy a space heater, the technician said, because until you get the guy who built this to come back and type in the bypass code, this system is a 2-ton paperweight. That will be $300 for the service call. That was the breaking point, the moment when reality crashed through the delusion of their victory. They realized that the luxury they had stolen was actually a cage, and I held the key. I was sitting in my studio reading a biography of Frederick Douglass when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Vivian. I let it ring. The sound filled the small room, but it didn't disturb my peace. It was just noise. It rang again. Then a text message popped up. Pick up the phone, Eli. The heat is off. Preston is sick. Stop playing games and give us the code. I stared at the words. Stop playing games. She still thought this was a game. She thought I was doing this to spite her. She didn't understand that I wasn't doing anything. I was simply absent, and my absence was the cause of their misery. I thought about answering. I thought about explaining that there was no simple code I could give them over the phone, that I would have to come over, open the manifold manually, bleed the air from the lines, and reset the digital handshake, a process that took 3 hours of hard labor. But then I remembered the way Preston had looked at me. Goo aesthetics. Outdated. Crazy old man. I remembered Vivian slapping the divorce papers onto the table. I remembered Nia looking away while they stripped me of my dignity. I swiped left on the notification. Block caller. Then I blocked Preston. And finally, with a heavy heart, I blocked Nia. I put the phone down on the small pine table. I stood up and walked to the kitchenette. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The steam rose in the quiet air. It was strange. For 40 years, I had been the one who fixed everything. If a light bulb flickered, I was there. If a faucet dripped, I was there. I had made myself indispensable, thinking it would make me loved. But it only made me used. Now I was useless to them. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted better than the expensive blend we used to buy at the Penthouse. It tasted like autonomy. Across the city, the temperature in the Penthouse was dropping. Tonight it would hit 50 degrees inside. The marble floors they were so proud of would become ice rinks. The glass walls would radiate cold. They wanted the crown. They never asked how heavy it was. I opened my book and turned the page. Let them buy space heaters. Let them wear their coats inside. Let them learn that a house is not a home just because you own the deed. A home is a system of care. And the caretaker had resigned. The silence in my studio was beautiful. But I knew it wouldn't last. The heat was just the beginning. The smart windows were next. And then the tax bill. I settled into my chair. I was in no rush. The lesson was just beginning. It took exactly 7 days for the legal landmine to detonate. I knew the timing because I wrote the schedule myself back in 1982. The first week of every month was when the building association audited the accounts and issued the mandatory levy for the technical manager. For 40 years that bill had come to me, and I had paid it without blinking. I viewed it as the cost of stewardship. I viewed it as my duty to the steel and glass sanctuary I had built. But to Vivian and her shark of a lawyer, Mr. Miller, it was about to look like a financial apocalypse. I was sitting in my studio apartment enjoying the warmth of a simple electric radiator. It was a Tuesday morning. Outside, the sky was that bruised purple color that warns of a coming snowstorm. I had just finished my morning run along the lakefront and was settling in with a cup of tea and a book on urban planning. My phone was silent on the table. I had kept the block on Vivian and Preston active, but I had unblocked Mr. Miller. I knew he would be the first one to realize the magnitude of their mistake. I imagined the scene playing out in the penthouse. By now, the ambient temperature inside the glass walls would be hovering around 55 degrees. Without my daily calibration of the pressure valves, the radiant heating was dead. Vivian would be wearing her mink coat inside the house, pacing back and forth on the freezing marble floors. Preston would be hiding in the guest room under 3 duvets, probably blaming the cheap system I had installed rather than his own incompetence. At 10 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. It was the law offices of Miller and Associates. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to look at the document on his desk and feel the knot of panic tightening in his stomach. I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello, Mr. Banks?" Miller's voice was high, tight, and breathless. He sounded like a man who had just watched a car crash in slow motion. "Mr. Banks, we need to talk. Immediately." I took a slow sip of my tea. "I am afraid I am busy, Mr. Miller. I have a very tight schedule of reading and looking out the window today. Besides, I thought all communication was supposed to go through my attorney now." "That was your instruction, was it not, Eli, please?" Miller dropped the formality. His voice cracked. "I just received a notification from the Millennium Tower Trust. They are billing the penthouse owner for the monthly structural maintenance retainer. There must be a mistake. The computer must have glitched when we transferred the title." I leaned back in my chair. "There is no glitch, Miller. You are a lawyer. You pride yourself on reading the fine print. Did you not read the original building charter of 1982? The one attached to the deed?" There was a silence on the other end. A heavy, terrified silence. I could hear papers shuffling frantically. Miller was searching for the clause he had ignored in his rush to help Vivian steal my home. I decided to help him. "Look at Article 4, Section C. The designation of ownership." I heard him muttering as he scanned the page. "Fee simple, joint tenancy. Here it is. Technical manager owner." He stopped. I could almost hear the blood draining from his face. "Technical manager owner." I repeated the words slowly, savoring them. It sounds impressive, doesn't it, Miller? It sounds like a position of power. But in the world of commercial architecture, it is a position of liability. "What does this mean?" Eli Miller whispered. "It means," I explained calmly, "that the penthouse is not classified as a residential unit under the city zoning laws. It is classified as an industrial control deck. The person who holds the deed to that unit is not just a homeowner. They are the designated chief engineer of the entire 40-story tower. They are legally responsible for the safety and maintenance of the superstructure." Miller started to stammer. But that is insane. You cannot expect a residential owner to maintain a skyscraper." "I did it for 40 years, I said. "But I am a licensed architect and a structural engineer. I did 90% of the labor myself. I inspected the elevator cables. I balanced the water pumps. I calibrated the sway dampeners on the roof. I did it because I loved the building, and because I did the labor myself, I continued. The cost was manageable. But now you have an owner who is a socialite and a son-in-law who thinks manual labor is for peasants. They cannot do the work, Miller, which means they have to pay the trust to hire outside contractors to do it for them. Union contractors. Emergency rates." Miller's voice rose to a scream. "How much, Eli? How much is the bill?" I looked at my watch. "It should have arrived in your inbox 5 minutes ago. Why don't you tell me?" I heard the click of a mouse. Then a gasp. A genuine, horrified gasp that told me everything I needed to know. $45,000, Miller choked out, per month. This has to be a joke. The HOA fees were listed as $2,000. The HOA fees are $2,000, I corrected him. That covers the doorman and the flower arrangements in the lobby. The $45,000 is the structural maintenance levy. That covers the elevator certification, the facade inspection, the boiler insurance, and the hydraulic pressure testing. It is mandatory, Miller. It is a lien against the property. If they miss a payment, the trust can foreclose on the penthouse within 60 days. $45,000 a month. That was $540,000 a year, post-tax, just to live in the house they had stolen. "You set them up," Miller accused me. You knew this would happen. You trapped them. I did not trap anyone, I said, my voice turning cold. I offered them a choice. I sat at that dining table and I asked Vivian if she was sure. I asked her to leave the penthouse out of the divorce. I offered to keep the burden. She called me selfish. She said I was trying to cheat her. She wanted the crown Miller. Well, now she has to wear it, and it is very heavy. I am going to sue you, Miller shouted. I will prove you acted in bad faith. Good luck with that, I said. You drafted the transfer agreement, Miller. You stood in that room and told me to sign. You are the legal expert. If you failed to advise your client on the liabilities attached to the asset, that sounds like a malpractice suit waiting to happen. Does Vivian know yet? The silence on the other end was the answer. He hadn't told her. He was terrified to tell her. She is at the penthouse right now, Miller whispered. She called me an hour ago screaming about the cold. She wants to sue the HVAC company. I laughed. A dry, humorless sound. Tell her not to bother. The HVAC company cannot fix it. The system is locked out. It needs the technical manager to input the override code. And since I am no longer the technical manager and she is, well, she better start reading the manual. It is about 4,000 pages long. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment listening to the hum of the refrigerator in my small kitchenette. I pictured the scene that was about to unfold. Miller would have to call Vivian. He would have to explain that her victory was actually a financial death sentence. Vivian, who spent money like water but had no idea how to make it, would go nuclear. She would scream. She would throw things. She would deny reality. She would say things like, "That is impossible," and fix it. But this was not something that could be fixed with a tantrum or a bribe. This was contract law. This was engineering physics. These were the two things I respected most in the world because they did not care about your feelings. They only cared about facts. And the fact was that Preston and Nia, who were barely scraping by on credit cards and appearances, were now responsible for a bill that exceeded their combined annual income. I imagined Preston's face when he heard the number, $45,000. He had probably thought he was inheriting a $5 million asset he could leverage for loans. Instead, he had inherited a black hole that would suck every penny he had. The irony was delicious. They had called me outdated. They had said I didn't know how to maximize the value of the property. They were right. I didn't treat the property as an investment vehicle. I treated it as a responsibility. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow had started to fall, big, heavy flakes drifting down onto the gray streets of Chicago. In the penthouse, the temperature would be dropping further. By tonight, the water in the pipes might start to freeze if they didn't keep the water moving. If the pipes burst, well, that would be another $50,000 in damage. I almost felt sorry for the building. It didn't deserve this. It was a masterpiece of engineering being piloted by children. But then I remembered the way Vivian had looked at me when she threatened to destroy my reputation with the Millennium Tower lie. I remembered the cruelty in her eyes. She was willing to burn down my legacy to get what she wanted. So let her freeze. I picked up my phone again. I had one more call to make. Not to Vivian, not to Miller, but to an old friend of mine named Sarah who worked at the city tax assessor's office. If Miller was panicking about the maintenance bill, he was going to have a heart attack when the tax implications hit. Because in the eyes of the IRS, transferring a $5 million property for $0 wasn't a divorce settlement if the receiving party, Preston and Nia, wasn't the spouse. It was a gift. And the tax on gifts of that magnitude was brutal. But I would save that surprise for later. For now, I just wanted to enjoy my tea. I went back to my book. But I couldn't focus on the words. I kept glancing at the clock, calculating the timeline. Miller would call Vivian in 5 minutes. The screaming would start in 6. The denial would last for an hour. Then the desperation would set in. They would try to find a loophole. They would try to find a contractor who would work cheaper. They would realize that the specialized German parts I used were proprietary and only sold to certified engineers. They were trapped in a glass cage of their own making. I took another sip of tea. It was Earl Grey. Bergamot and black tea. It tasted like justice. I wondered if Vivian was wearing the diamond necklace I bought her for our 30th anniversary. It would look beautiful against the fur coat she would have to wear to dinner tonight. The phone rang again. It was Miller again. I declined the call. I had given them the keys. I had given them the title. I had given them exactly what they asked for. If they choked on it, that wasn't my problem. I was just a retired architect living in a studio apartment in Hyde Park. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have a single deadline to meet. The first of the month is usually a day of new beginnings. Rent is paid. Salaries are deposited. The cycle of the city resets. But for the residents of the penthouse at the Millennium Tower, the first of the month was about to become a day of reckoning. I knew the mail carrier schedule by heart. At 10:30 in the morning, the heavy canvas bag would be dropped at the front desk. At 11 o'clock, Henry, or whoever was covering his shift, would sort the envelopes into the brass mailboxes. And at 11:15, the specific heavy envelope from the building trust would be delivered directly to the penthouse door. I was sitting in a park near my studio feeding pigeons with a stale bagel. It was a cold morning, but I was dressed warmly. I felt a strange sense of anticipation. It was not malice. It was the feeling an engineer gets when he watches a stress test. You know the beam is going to snap. You just do not know exactly which second it will happen. Back at the tower, the envelope arrived right on schedule. It was thick. Cream-colored linen paper with the embossed seal of the trust. It looked elegant. It looked expensive. And inside it held a number that would stop a heart. I can picture Preston opening it. He was probably sitting at the dining table wearing one of his silk robes, trying to ignore the chill in the air. The temperature in the apartment had likely dropped to 58 degrees by now. Just cold enough to be uncomfortable. Just cold enough to require a sweater inside a $5 million home. He would slice the envelope open with the silver letter opener I had left on the desk. He would unfold the document, expecting perhaps a welcome letter or a minor utility bill. Instead, he saw the invoice. Item 1. Structural maintenance retainer. $45,000. Item 2. Emergency reserve fund contribution. $5,000. Item 3. Hydraulic system insurance. $2,000. Total due immediately. $52,000. And that was just the first page. Behind it was the second letter, the one from the Cook County tax assessor. This was the one I had warned Vivian about years ago, but she never listened. She thought taxes were something that just happened to other people. The letter would explain in dry bureaucratic language that because the property had transferred ownership from Elijah Banks to Preston Walsh and Nia Banks, the tax assessment was no longer frozen at the 1982 rate. The property had been reassessed at current market value. And because it was a transfer between non-spouses, it triggered an immediate reassessment of the transfer tax liability. Amount due. $150,000. $200,000 of debt. In one morning. I imagine Preston staring at the paper. The numbers probably didn't make sense to him at first. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes. He looked for the decimal point, hoping maybe it was $450. But the zeros were relentless. They marched across the page like soldiers. Vivian, he would have screamed, his voice cracking with panic. Vivian, get in here. Vivian would rush in from the bedroom, wrapping her coat tighter around her. What is it? Is it the heat? Did you fix the heat? Preston would shove the papers into her chest. Look at this. Just look at what your husband left us. Vivian would read it. She would gasp. No, this is impossible. Eli paid $2,000 a month. I saw the checks. He paid the HOA fee. Preston would yell, losing his composure entirely. This isn't the HOA fee. This is the structural maintenance. Why didn't you know about this? You lived here for 40 years. I never looked at the bills, Vivian would shriek back. Eli handled the money. He handled everything. And there it was, the truth. Eli handled everything. I was the shield that protected them from reality. I was the dam that held back the floodwaters of cost and responsibility. And they had broken the dam thinking there was treasure behind it. Instead, there was just water. But Preston was a gambler. He was a day trader who was used to losing money and trying to double down to win it back. I knew his type. He wouldn't accept defeat. He would try to leverage the asset. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. I am calling the bank. We need cash. We will take a line of credit against the penthouse. It is worth $5.5 million. We can pull out $1 million today, pay these bills, and have enough left over to renovate. He dialed the number of his private banker. A man named Stevens. I knew Stevens. He was a shark, but he was a cautious shark. I can imagine the conversation perfectly because I knew exactly what Stevens would see when he pulled up the property file. Hey, Stevens, it is Preston. Look, I need to open a HELOC on the penthouse immediately. Yes, we have the title now. Send over the papers. Preston would be pacing the room trying to look in control in front of Nia and Vivian. Then there would be a pause, a long silence on the other end of the line. Preston's face would change. What do you mean there's a flag on the property? I took a sip of my coffee in the park. The wind rustled the trees. The flag was the technical manager clause. No bank in their right mind would lend money against a property that carried a mandatory unlimited liability for structural repairs. It was what they called a toxic asset. It was like trying to get a mortgage on a nuclear power plant that was leaking. Preston listened. His face went pale, then red, then a deep purple of rage. What do you mean zero equity? It is a penthouse. It is the crown jewel of the city. He listened again. Stevens was explaining the math. If the owner is liable for the skyscraper's infrastructure, the risk outweighs the value. The asset is essentially worthless as collateral until the liability is removed, or until the owner proves they have $5 million in liquid cash reserves to cover potential disasters. Preston didn't have $5 million. I doubted he had $5,000. He slammed the phone down on the table so hard the screen cracked. "They won't lend on it," he whispered. His voice was hollow. "We can't mortgage it. We can't sell it quickly because no buyer will touch that clause. We are stuck." Nia finally spoke up, her voice small and terrified. "Stuck? What do you mean stuck, Preston? You said this would solve our problems. You said selling Daddy's art and mortgaging the house would pay off your trading debts." The room must have gone silent. Vivian turned slowly to look at her son-in-law. "Trading debts?" she asked, her voice dangerous. What trading debts? Preston looked like a trapped animal. He had been hiding his failures. He had been playing the part of the successful financier while digging a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky. He had pushed for the penthouse not because he wanted a better view, but because he was drowning. He needed a lifeline. And I had handed him an anchor. "It is nothing," Preston stammered. "Just a bad quarter. The market is volatile." "You lied to us," Vivian screamed. She advanced on him. "You told me you were worth millions. You told me if we got rid of Eli, we would be free." "We are free," Preston yelled back. "We own the house. We own a debt." Vivian threw the invoice at him. The papers fluttered to the floor like dead leaves. "We owe $200,000, Preston. Do you have it?" "Because I don't." "Eli took the savings. He took the liquid cash. All I have is this house, and now this house is eating us alive." The family portrait was shattering. The cracks were spreading faster than the cold in the floorboards. Preston turned on her, his eyes wild. "Don't blame me, you greedy old witch. You were the one who pushed him out. You were the one who said he was holding us back." "Well, guess what, Vivian? He wasn't holding us back. He was holding us up." He kicked the chair. It skidded across the marble floor, making a terrible screeching sound. "And fix this damn heat. I am freezing." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door to the master bedroom. The bedroom I had slept in for 40 years. The bedroom where I had dreamed and planned and loved. Now it was just a bunker for a coward. Vivian stood there in the living room. Nia was crying softly on the sofa. "Mom," Nia sobbed. "What are we going to do?" Vivian looked around the apartment. She looked at the high ceilings she had bragged about to her friends. She looked at the view of the lake she had claimed she deserved. For the first time, she really saw the apartment. She didn't see a trophy. She saw a machine. She saw the vents that were blowing cold air. She saw the light fixtures that were humming with an odd frequency because the voltage regulator hadn't been calibrated. She realized that she was inside the belly of a beast she didn't understand. She walked over to the window. She looked down at the city. Somewhere out there, I was free. I was warm. I was drinking coffee and reading a book. And she was trapped in a glass tower with a mounting debt and a liar. She picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over my name. She wanted to call me. She wanted to scream at me, to beg me, to threaten me, but she knew it wouldn't work. She knew me. She knew that when I walked away, I walked away. I didn't play games. I didn't look back. She put the phone down. "We have to sell the art," she said, her voice flat. Nia looked up. "But Dad loves those paintings. You can't sell them. We have to pay the bill," Vivian snapped. "We have to sell the Jacob Lawrence. It is the only thing we have that is liquid." She walked over to the wall where the painting hung. The Builders. A masterpiece depicting black men building a skyscraper. Irony upon irony. She reached for it. But she didn't know about the authentication. She didn't know that a painting without its provenance papers is just a pretty picture. And the papers were safely tucked away in my safety deposit box across town. She took the painting down. "Call the auction house," she ordered Nia. Tell them we have a rush sale. She thought she had found a way out. She thought she could cannibalize my collection to feed the house. She was wrong. I stood up from the park bench. The pigeons scattered. I brushed the crumbs from my coat. It was time to go back to my studio. I had a feeling that tomorrow would bring even more interesting news. The first bill had arrived. The first crack had appeared. But the real collapse. That was just getting started. The wind picked up, blowing off the lake. It was freezing. But as I walked home, I felt warmer than I had in years. Because warmth isn't just about temperature. It is about knowing that you have paid your dues. And knowing that for the first time in your life, no one is spending your hard-earned peace. I checked my bank account on my phone. My pension had just been deposited. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. All of it. I smiled. Let them have the millions. I had the freedom. And right now, freedom was the only currency that mattered. Chicago storms are not like storms anywhere else in the world. They do not just rain, they attack. They come off Lake Michigan with the force of a freight train carrying water that feels more like ice shards than liquid. I have lived in this city for 71 years, and I have learned to respect the sky. When I saw the forecast that Wednesday evening, I knew exactly what was coming. A low-pressure system was colliding with a cold front right over the loop. The weatherman called it a severe thunderstorm watch. I called it a stress test for the Millennium Tower. I sat in my studio apartment listening to the wind rattle my single-pane window. I was warm. I was dry. I was eating a bowl of homemade chili and listening to jazz on the radio. But my mind was 3 miles away, drifting up to the 40th floor. I was thinking about the barometric pressure sensors I had installed on the penthouse roof in 1992. You see, smart buildings are a lot like toddlers. They need constant reassurance. When the air pressure drops suddenly outside the building, the sensors inside get confused. They ask the central computer a simple question. Is this a storm, or is this a rapid decompression event caused by a fire? For 40 years, whenever that question was asked, I was there to answer it. I would get a notification on my console. Pressure drop detected. Confirm storm mode. I would press a button. The system would lock the windows tight, engage the waterproof seals, and ramp up the internal heating to combat the draft. But tonight, there was no one to answer the question. The system had been reset to factory defaults. And the factory default safety protocol for a rapid pressure drop without manual override was not to lock down. It was to ventilate. The logic was simple. If the pressure inside is higher than outside, open the vents to prevent the glass from shattering. I took a spoonful of chili. I looked at the clock. It was 7 p.m. The storm was just hitting the shoreline. At the penthouse, I imagined they were trying to have a normal dinner, trying to ignore the fact that they owed $200,000, trying to ignore the cold radiating from the floor. Preston was likely sitting on his new Italian leather sofa. He had bragged about it to me before I left. $20,000 of hand-stitched calfskin imported from Milan. He said it was the centerpiece of his new design. Then the sensors hit the trigger point. There would have been no warning, no alarm, just the smooth hum of high-torque hydraulic actuators engaging. The south-facing wall of the penthouse is not a wall. It is a series of 4 massive glass panels. Each one weighs 2 tons. I designed them to slide open to create an indoor-outdoor terrace, but I only opened them on sunny days in July. Tonight, at the height of a gale-force storm, the computer decided that the building needed to breathe. With a mechanical groan, the locks disengaged. The panels began to slide. I can see it perfectly in my mind. The wind would have hit them first. A blast of freezing air that knocked over vases and sent paperwork flying across the room. Then came the rain. It did not fall down. It came in horizontal. Sheets of gray water driven by 60-mile-an-hour gusts. It wasn't a sprinkle. It was a fire hose. Preston must have screamed. Vivian must have shrieked. They probably scrambled up from their seats, dropping their wine glasses. Close it. Close it. Preston would have yelled, running toward the wall. He probably grabbed the handle of the moving glass panel. He probably tried to pull it shut. But you cannot fight hydraulics with human muscle. Those motors are designed to move steel against wind resistance. Preston pulling on it was like a fly trying to stop a charging bull. The panel didn't even slow down. It kept sliding until it was fully open. A 20-foot gap in the side of the building, exposing the living room to the wrath of the storm. The rain poured in. It soaked the Persian rugs. It soaked the silk curtains. And it soaked the $20,000 Italian leather sofa. But the real tragedy wasn't the furniture. It was the floor. That floor was my pride and joy. It was white oak reclaimed from a demolished church in Bronzeville. The wood was over 100 years old. I had sanded it myself. I had stained it by hand. I had laid it in a herringbone pattern that took me 3 months to complete. It was more than a floor. It was history. Oak is strong, but it has a weakness. It drinks water. And when it drinks, it expands. As the rain pooled on the surface, the wood would start to cup. Within hours, the planks would buckle, pushing against each other with enough force to crack the subfloor. I pictured Vivian standing there in her expensive dress drenched to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She was probably shouting at the smart home console on the wall. Alexa, close the window. Computer, close the window. But the computer was offline. The voice recognition was disabled. The manual control panel was flashing a blue light that meant safety venting active. Do not obstruct. They were helpless. They were 3 people standing in a hurricane inside their own home. Preston gave up on the door. He ran to the kitchen and started grabbing towels, bath towels, dish towels, paper towels. He threw them on the floor, trying to soak up the deluge. It was pathetic. It was like trying to stop the Titanic from sinking with a teacup. The water kept coming. It flowed past the sofa. It flowed toward the hallway. It flowed toward the bedrooms. Vivian grabbed her phone. She called the doorman. Help us. The windows opened. We are flooding. Send maintenance. But what could maintenance do? The building superintendent, Carl, was asleep at home. Even if he drove there in the storm, he didn't have the override key. That key was in my pocket in a small brass casing attached to my keychain. The only way to close those windows without the software command was to manually crank the hydraulic pump. The access panel for the pump was located in the ceiling of the utility closet. You needed a ladder. You needed a specialized wrench. And you needed the strength to turn a gear against 2,000 pounds per square inch of pressure. Preston didn't have a ladder. He didn't have a wrench. And he certainly didn't have the strength. They retreated. They had no choice. The living room was a wash zone. The temperature plummeted to match the outside air, 34 degrees. They huddled in the hallway behind the closed door of the master bedroom. They were wet. They were shivering, and they were listening to the sound of their stolen kingdom being destroyed. I finished my chili. I washed the bowl in my small sink. I felt a pang of sadness for the oak floor. It didn't deserve to die like that. It had survived 100 years of church services. It had survived the demolition of the church. It had survived 40 years of my footsteps. But it wouldn't survive one night of Preston's ownership. My phone lit up. It was a number I didn't recognize. Probably Preston using a burner phone since I had blocked his main line. I didn't answer. I knew what they wanted. They wanted me to save them. They wanted me to run through the rain, climb the ladder, and turn the crank. But I was 71 years old. I was retired. And according to the paperwork they had forced me to sign, I was no longer the technical manager. I turned off the ringer. I went to my window and looked north. Through the rain and the fog, I could see the faint outline of the downtown skyline. I couldn't see the Millennium Tower, but I knew it was there. I knew that right now on the 40th floor, the wind was howling through my library, knocking my books off the shelves. The water would be ruining the drywall by now. The mold would start to grow within 48 hours. The repair bill for this night alone would exceed $100,000. The Italian sofa was ruined. The floor was ruined. The walls were ruined. But the most damaged thing in that penthouse wasn't the wood or the leather. It was their arrogance. They had thought that owning a house meant holding a piece of paper. They didn't understand that a house is a shelter, and a shelter requires respect. If you don't respect the shelter, it will stop protecting you. Tonight, the Millennium Tower was teaching them a lesson in physics. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it also abhors a fool. I turned away from the window. I pulled my blanket up to my chin. My studio was small, but it was dry. The radiator clicked softly, a comforting sound of warmth and function. I wondered if they were still trying to mop up the water with towels. I wondered if Preston was blaming Vivian. I wondered if Nia was remembering the times I used to sit with her during thunderstorms telling her stories so she wouldn't be scared. I wasn't there to tell stories tonight. The story they were living now was a horror story, and they were writing it themselves one page at a time. I closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep, listening to the rain against the glass. It was a peaceful sound when you were on the right side of the window. There is an old saying that every man in Chicago knows. There are only two things certain in life: death and taxes. But at least death has the decency to only happen to you once. The Internal Revenue Service, on the other hand, will keep coming for you until there is nothing left but bones. I was sitting in a laundromat on 55th Street watching my shirt spin in the dryer. It was a rhythmic, hypnotic sound. Thump, swish, thump, swish. It was Thursday morning. In my previous life, Thursday mornings were reserved for board meetings and site inspections. Now Thursday morning was for separating whites from colors. I liked it. There is a simple honesty in doing your own laundry. You put in dirty clothes, you add soap, and they come out clean. If only the mess Vivian and Preston had created could be cleaned so easily. While I was folding my socks, my phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was a notification from my credit monitoring service. I had kept my name on the family alert system mostly out of habit, but partly out of curiosity. The alert was simple. Inquiry detected. Internal Revenue Service. Asset freeze warning. I stopped folding. I knew exactly what had happened. The other shoe had not just dropped. It had crashed through the floor. You see, when Vivian demanded the house, she thought she was clever. She thought she was bypassing the messy business of buying me out. She just wanted the title transferred. She wanted the deed in her name and the names of her daughter and son-in-law. She called it a settlement. But the federal government has a different name for it. They call it a gift. And because I received $0 in return for a property appraised at $5.5 million, the IRS viewed the entire transaction as a taxable gift from me to them. But here is the kicker. Since I did not pay the tax at the time of transfer because I refused to pay for my own robbery, the liability shifted to the recipients. That meant Preston and Nia. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene that must have taken place an hour ago. The mail carrier would have delivered a certified letter. Not the white envelope from the building trust. This one would be brown, thin, menacing, with the return address simply reading Department of the Treasury. Preston would have signed for it, his hand probably shaking because deep down, every fake financial guru knows that eventually the math catches up with you. He would open it, and he would see the number. $5.5 million assessed value, 40% federal gift tax rate, total amount due immediately, $2.2 million. I could almost hear the scream from 3 miles away. It would not be a scream of anger like when the heat went out. It would be a scream of terror, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes the ground has opened up beneath him. $2.2 million. Cash, due in 30 days. Or they would seize the asset. The irony was so thick you could choke on it. I vividly remembered sitting in our library 3 years ago with our estate planner. I had tried to set up a trust, a slow, tax-efficient way to pass the property to Nia over 20 years. Vivian had been sitting on the sofa looking at a magazine. She hadn't even looked up when I explained the tax brackets. "You are always so boring, Eli," she had said, flipping a page. "You and your trusts and your structures. You just want to control the money from the grave. You are a miser. Just give it to them when the time comes. Why do we have to pay lawyers to make it complicated?" I had tried to explain. "Vivian, the tax rate is 40%. If we do it your way, the government takes almost half. If we do it my way, we save millions." She had laughed. A cruel, dismissive laugh. "You just hate spending money. You always have. You act like we are poor." I wasn't acting like we were poor, I was acting like we were smart. But to a woman who measured love in diamonds, logic looked like stinginess. Now that stinginess was the only thing that could have saved them. I picked up my laundry basket. The clothes were warm. It was a comforting feeling. Back at the penthouse, the temperature was freezing, but the heat from the IRS letter was probably burning a hole in the mahogany table. Preston would be frantic. He would be shouting at Nia, "How could you not know this? Your father did this on purpose. He set us up." He would be pacing back and forth, avoiding the water-damaged spots on the floor from the storm the night before. "We have to sell," he would say. "We have to sell the house right now. If we sell it for $5 million, we can pay the $2 million tax and keep $3 million. We can still be rich." He would grab his phone. He would call a real estate agent. Maybe he would call the best broker in the city, a woman named Linda who had sold units in the tower before. I imagined the call. "Linda, bring a photographer. We are listing the penthouse. Today, $5.5 million. And Linda, being a professional, would pause. She would tap her keyboard. She would pull up the title report. "I am sorry, Mr. Walsh," she would say. "I cannot list the property." "What? Why not?" Preston would scream. "Because there is a cloud on the title," she would explain gently. "The technical manager liability clause. And now I see a preliminary tax lien notice filing from the IRS. No buyer can close on this property until those debts are cleared. You cannot sell what you do not truly own, Mr. Walsh." Preston would drop the phone. The walls were closing in. They were trapped in a box. They couldn't live in it because they couldn't afford the maintenance. They couldn't borrow against it because it was a toxic asset. And now they couldn't sell it because the government had its teeth in the deed. And the clock was ticking. The IRS adds interest daily. Compounded. I walked out of the laundromat. The cold air hit my face. I walked past a newsstand. The headline on the local business paper caught my eye. "Real estate market softens in luxury sector." Even the market was against them. I wondered if Vivian was remembering our conversation now. I wondered if she remembered calling me a miser. Did she realize yet that my refusal to waste money was the only reason she had lived like a queen for 40 years? I doubted it. People like Vivian do not learn from reflection. They only learn from pain. And the pain was just beginning. My phone rang again. It was a local number. I answered it this time, thinking it might be the dry cleaner. It was Nia. Dad. Her voice was small, broken, like a little girl who had dropped her ice cream cone in the sand. I stopped walking. I leaned against a brick wall. "Hello, Nia. Dad, please. You have to help us. We got a letter. From the government. They say we owe millions. Preston is throwing up in the bathroom. Mom is just staring at the wall. Dad, they are going to take everything." I listened to her cry. It hurt. It truly hurt. She was my daughter. Every instinct in my body wanted to say, "It is okay, baby. Daddy will fix it. Daddy will write a check. I had the money. I had saved for 50 years. I could pay the tax. I could fix the heat. I could make the nightmare go away." But then I remembered the dinner. I remembered her silence when Preston insulted me. I remembered her choosing the penthouse over my dignity. If I fixed this now, she would never learn. She would go back to being the passive princess waiting for a man to save her. She would stay married to that parasite Preston. Sometimes love means letting your children fall so they can learn how to stand up. "Naya," I said softly, "I cannot help you." "What? But you have the money, Dad." "We know you do. The money is not the problem, Nia. The problem is that you signed a contract you did not understand. You accepted a gift you could not afford, and you married a fool who thinks he knows better than the experts." "Dad, please. We will lose the house, then lose it," I said. My voice was hard now. "Lose the house, Nia. It is just a house. Maybe if you lose it, you will find yourself. But we will go to jail tax evasion. You won't go to jail if you sell your other assets and pay what you can. Sell the cars, sell the jewelry, sell the designer clothes, empty your savings, show the IRS you are trying. We don't have any savings." Preston lost it all. The confession hung in the air. I knew it. But hearing her say it confirmed everything. "Then you have a long road ahead of you, daughter. I suggest you get a lawyer, a tax lawyer, not the divorce lawyer your mother used. Get a real one." I hung up. My hand was shaking slightly. It is not easy to hear your child beg and say no. It goes against nature. But this was necessary. I looked up at the sky. It was gray and heavy, $2.2 million. That was the price of their arrogance. Preston had wanted to be a big shot. He wanted to live in the sky. Well, now he was going to learn that the air up there is very thin. And if you do not know how to breathe, you suffocate. I started walking again. I had to get my groceries. I was making a stew tonight. A simple beef stew with carrots and potatoes. It cost about $12 to make. It would taste better than any meal Preston and Vivian were eating tonight, because my stew was paid for, and my conscience was clear. I wondered how long it would take before Preston tried to run. A rat always leaves a sinking ship, and the Millennium Tower penthouse wasn't just sinking, it was on fire. I checked my watch. It was noon. The banks were open. The IRS offices were open. The hunt was on. And I was just a spectator in the cheap seats watching the lions eat the gladiators. The invitations to the annual charity gala at the Museum of Contemporary Art are hard to come by. Unless, of course, you are Elijah Banks, the man who designed the wing we were standing in. For the first time in 20 years, I walked into that room not as the plus one of Mrs. Vivian Banks, but as myself. I was wearing a new tuxedo one that fit my shoulders properly, not the old one Vivian always insisted I wear because she liked the cut. I felt different. I felt lighter. Walking beside me was Maya. She was not my date in the romantic sense, though I saw the whispers starting the moment we walked through the bronze doors. Maya was my former student and now one of the sharpest contract lawyers in Chicago. She was the one helping me navigate the legal fortress I was building around my remaining assets. She held her head high, looking at the room with the critical eye of a predator assessing the terrain. "You look like $1 million, Eli," Maya whispered, leaning in as we took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "Or should I say you look like $5.5 million minus the tax liability." I chuckled. It felt good to laugh. For years, these parties had been a chore. I would stand in the corner holding Vivian's purse while she worked the room trying to climb a social ladder that had no top. I was just the prop, the silent husband who paid the bills. But tonight, I was the architect. People nodded at me. Former colleagues shook my hand with genuine respect. They asked about my retirement. They asked about my theories on sustainable urban living. Nobody asked about Vivian, until I saw her. She was standing near the sculpture garden. From a distance, she looked as she always did, immaculate. Her silver gown was structured like armor. Her hair was sprayed into submission. But as I got closer, the illusion began to crack. I saw the tension in her jaw. I saw the way her fingers gripped her champagne flute so tightly her knuckles were white. She was not looking at the art. She was scanning the room, hunting for a target. She spotted me. Her eyes widened. For a second I saw fear. Then I saw the mask slide back into place. The mask of the benevolent, long-suffering wife. She handed her glass to a waiter and marched toward me. The crowd seemed to part for her not out of respect but out of an instinct to avoid the blast radius. Maya stiffened beside me. "Do you want me to intercept?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, I need to do this." Vivian stopped 3 feet away from me. She looked me up and down. Her eyes lingered on my new tuxedo, then flicked to Maya with a look of pure, venomous assumption. "Eli," she said. Her voice was sugary sweet, but I could hear the razor blades hidden inside the candy. "You look... well, I see you have moved on rather quickly." I sipped my water. "Good evening, Vivian. You know Maya. She was the top of her class at Northwestern. You met her at the firm's Christmas party 3 years ago." Vivian dismissed Maya with a wave of her hand as if swatting away a fly. "I do not remember the help, Eli. We need to talk. Privately." Maya looked at me. I nodded. She stepped away, disappearing into the crowd, but remaining close enough to intervene if things got legal. Vivian moved in closer. She smelled of Chanel No. 5 and desperation. The scent was cloying. It reminded me of arguments in the car and silent dinners. "Eli, this has gone far enough," she hissed, lowering her voice so the donors nearby wouldn't hear. "We received the tax notice. Preston is a wreck. Nia cannot stop crying. You have made your point." I looked at a painting on the wall behind her. It was a chaotic, abstract piece, red and black slashes on canvas. It looked like my bank account used to look when she had access to it. "I made no point, Vivian. I simply followed your instructions. You wanted the house. You have the house. Stop it," she snapped. "Stop acting like this innocent old man. You knew about the taxes. You knew about the maintenance. You trapped us. But I am willing to be the bigger person here." I raised an eyebrow. The bigger person. That was rich. "I am willing to forgive you, Eli." Vivian continued, her voice softening into that manipulative purr she used when she wanted jewelry. "Come home. I will let you move back into the guest room for now. We can call Miller and have him draft an amendment. You can take back the title. You can pay the tax bill, and we will forget this whole ugly episode ever happened. We were a team, Eli. We can fix this." She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand was cold. She expected me to crumble. She expected me to be the lonely old man who missed his comfortable cage. She thought the past week had been hell for me. She had no idea it had been a rebirth. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. Then I looked into her eyes. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a profound, liberating indifference. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "Vivian," I said softly, "you really do not understand, do you? Understand what she demanded. That you are having a midlife crisis at 71, that you are trying to punish your family." I laughed. It was a dry, quiet sound. I am not punishing you. I am freeing myself. You think I signed those papers because I was weak. You think I signed them because you threatened to ruin my reputation. Vivian, my reputation was built on steel and concrete. It can withstand a little gossip. I took a step closer to her. I wanted her to hear this. I wanted her to understand the physics of our marriage. I signed those papers because I wanted to get rid of that apartment. Her face went slack. What? But you loved that place. You built it. I built it for you, I said. My voice was steady as a beam. I built it because you wanted to live in the clouds. I built it because you wanted the address. But do you know what that house is to me, Vivian? It is a monster. I gestured toward the window where the lights of the city twinkled. That penthouse is a high-altitude pressure vessel. It requires constant pressurization. It fights the wind 24 hours a day. It fights the thermal expansion of the sun. It fights the freezing contraction of the winter. For 20 years, I have been the one waking up at 3 a.m. to check the hydraulic seals. I have been the one listening to the groan of the metal. I have been the one writing checks for $50,000 every time a sensor failed just so you could host your bridge club without feeling a draft. Vivian stared at me, her mouth slightly open. I hated that house, Vivian. It was a golden handcuffs. It drained my energy. It drained my focus. And it drained my finances. I stayed there because I thought it made you happy. But then I realized nothing makes you happy. You are a black hole. You consume everything around you, and you still demand more light. Eli, she whispered. You don't mean that. I mean every word. When you put those divorce papers on the table, you didn't steal my home. You handed me a pardon from a life sentence. I took a deep breath. The air in the gallery smelled of expensive perfume and old paint, but to me it smelled like oxygen. So no, Vivian, I will not come back. I will not pay the tax. I will not fix the heat. The monster is yours now. You wanted to be the queen of the castle. Well, enjoy the throne. Just remember that the throne is made of ice and it is melting. Vivian's face crumbled. The mask fell away completely, leaving a terrified old woman who realized she had gambled everything on a bluff and lost. But we will lose it, she stammered. The IRS, the bank. We will lose everything. Then you will learn, I said. You will learn what it is like to live on Earth with the rest of us. It is not so bad, Vivian. The air is thicker down here. It is easier to breathe. I turned away from her. I saw Maya watching me from across the room. She gave me a subtle nod. Eli Vivian called after me, her voice rising, causing heads to turn. You can't leave me like this. I am your wife. Ex-wife, I corrected without looking back. I walked toward Maya. I walked toward the exit. I left Vivian standing alone in the middle of the crowded room, surrounded by art she couldn't afford and people who didn't care about her. As we walked out into the cool night air, Maya asked, "Are you okay?" I looked up at the sky. I couldn't see the stars because of the city lights, but I knew they were there. I am better than okay, Maya. I am finished with the demolition. Now I can finally start the new design. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't check the weather app to see if the wind would damage the roof. Let it blow. It wasn't my roof anymore. While I was walking out of the art gallery, feeling the cool night air on my face, a very different scene was playing out 3 miles away. The penthouse was no longer the jewel of the city. It was a cold, dark cage. The emergency heating units were struggling to keep the temperature above 55 degrees. The smell of damp wood from the ruined floors hung heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of stale alcohol. Preston Walsh, the man who had bragged about bringing a new vision to the property, was pacing the living room like a caged animal. He was wearing his expensive suit, but it was rumpled and stained. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. The veneer of the sophisticated financier had stripped away, leaving behind the raw panic of a fraud. He was on the phone screaming at someone. It wasn't a client, it was a loan shark. I knew this because I had done a background check on Preston the day after the wedding. I knew he owed $70,000 to some very dangerous people in the South Side, people who didn't care about real estate market fluctuations. They only cared about payment schedules. I do not have the cash right now, Preston shouted into the phone, his voice cracking. The asset is frozen. The IRS put a lien on it. No, I cannot sell it yet. You have to give me more time. He listened for a moment. His face went pale. He threw the phone onto the sofa. It bounced off the leather cushion, the one that was water-stained from the storm. Nia was sitting in the corner wrapped in a blanket. She looked small. She looked terrified. She had spent her whole life being protected first by me and then by the illusion of Preston. Now the illusion was gone and she was staring at a stranger. "Preston," she whispered. "Maybe we should call Dad. Maybe he can talk to the IRS." Preston spun around. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed and manic. "Do not talk to me about your father, Naya. This is all his fault. He set me up. He knew about the tax. He knew about the maintenance. He did this to destroy me. He did it because you insulted him," Nia said. Her voice was trembling, but there was a hint of spine in it finally. "You treated him like dirt, Preston. You treated his home like a hotel. What did you expect?" Preston marched over to her. He loomed over her chair, casting a long shadow in the dim light. "I expected to marry into a wealthy family, Nia. I expected assets. Liquid assets, not a money pit and a mountain of debt. You told me your father was generous. You told me he was a pushover. I never said that." Nia defended herself, shrinking back. "I said he loved me. And you said you loved me. You said you didn't care about the money." Preston laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound, a sound that stripped away the last layer of his disguise. "Love, Nia. Look at yourself. You have no job. You have no skills. You have no ambition. The only interesting thing about you was your last name and the inheritance attached to it. Without the money, you are just burden." Naya gasped. The words hit her harder than a physical blow. She stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "How can you say that? We are married." "Not for long," Preston sneered. "As soon as I figure out how to liquidate this place, I am gone. And I am taking my half of the cash." "You are not taking anything," Nia cried. "This is my father's house." "It is my house," Preston roared. And then he did it. He swung his hand. It wasn't a slap of passion. It was a slap of contempt. The back of his hand connected with Nia's cheek with a sickening crack. The force of it knocked her back onto the sofa. She didn't scream. She just gasped, holding her face, staring at him in absolute shock. Preston stood there, breathing hard. He didn't look sorry. He looked satisfied. He looked like a bully who had finally found someone weak enough to hurt. "Get up," he spat. "Stop being dramatic. What the hell is going on here?" The voice came from the hallway. It was Vivian. She was standing there in her nightgown holding a candle because she was trying to save electricity. She looked like a ghost, but her eyes were wide awake. She had seen it. She had seen the golden boy, the perfect son-in-law, strike her only child. Vivian had many faults. She was greedy, she was vain, she was shallow, but she was a mother. And for the first time in years, the mother in her woke up. She walked into the room. She moved slowly but with a dangerous energy. She ignored Preston. She went straight to Nia. She moved her daughter's hand and looked at the red mark blooming on her cheek. "He hit you," Vivian whispered. It wasn't a question. Nia nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," he said. "He said he only married me for the money." Vivian turned slowly to face Preston. For years she had taken his side. She had defended him when I said he was lazy. She had defended him when I said he was arrogant. She had pushed me out of my own home to make room for him. She had thought he was the son she never had. Now she saw him clearly. He wasn't a son. He was a parasite. And now that the host was sick, the parasite was biting. "Get out," Vivian said. Her voice was low. Preston looked at her. He didn't flinch. "Excuse me? I said get out of my house," Vivian repeated louder this time. "Pack your bags. Get out. If you are not gone in 10 minutes, I am calling the police." Preston looked at Vivian. Then he looked at Nia, huddled on the sofa. And then he started to laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full-throated guffaw. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a drink from one of my few remaining bottles. "You are calling the police?" he asked, taking a sip. "And tell them what?" "That we had a domestic dispute. It is her word against mine. And besides, you can't kick me out, Vivian." "Watch me," Vivian hissed. "This is my house. I am the head of this family." Preston slammed his glass down on the bar. Glass shattered. "You are nothing," he shouted. "You are a broke old woman living in a freezer. And this isn't your house. Look at the deed, Vivian. Look at the paper you made Eli sign." He walked over to the desk where the transfer documents were still lying in a messy pile. He picked up the deed and waved it in her face. "It says here, grantee, Preston Walsh and Nia Banks, joint tenants with rights of survivorship. Do you know what that means? Mother-in-law Vivian went pale. She had been so focused on getting my name off the deed she hadn't paid attention to whose names went on it. She had assumed since Nia was her daughter she would control it. It means I own 50% of this sinking ship, Preston sneered. I own half the walls, half the floor, and half the debt. I am not a guest here, Vivian. I am the landlord. He threw the paper at her. It hit her chest and fluttered to the floor. So no, I am not going anywhere. I am going to stay right here. I am going to sleep in the master bedroom. And you two, you can sleep in the guest room. Or the maid's quarters, I don't care. But until this house is sold and I get my cut, I am not moving an inch. Vivian stared at him. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She had traded a protector for a predator. She had traded a man who built things for a man who destroyed things. You are a monster, she whispered. No, Preston corrected her, fixing his cuffs. I am a businessman who has sold a bad deal, and now I am going to collect what I can. He looked at Nia. Stop crying, he ordered. Go make me some food. The takeout is cold. Nia didn't move. She looked at her mother. Vivian looked at Preston. Then she looked around the dark, cold room. The shadows seemed to be lengthening. The wind howled outside, rattling the glass. She realized then that she was trapped. She was locked in a high-rise dungeon with a man who hated her and a daughter who was broken. And the only man who could have stopped this, who could have thrown Preston out by the scruff of his neck, was sitting in a studio apartment in Hyde Park, probably reading a book. She had cast him out. Vivian sank onto a chair. Her legs gave out. She covered her face with her hands. What have we done? She sobbed. Preston ignored her. He picked up the bottle of whiskey and walked toward the master bedroom. My bedroom. Don't disturb me, he called over his shoulder. I have a headache. And fix that heater. It is freezing in here. He slammed the door. The sound echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Vivian and Nia sat in the silence. The red mark on Nia's cheek was darkening. The reality of their situation was settling in. They were alone, truly alone, and the man upstairs. He wasn't paying the rent. He was charging interest. I didn't know about the slap at that exact moment, but I felt a disturbance. Maybe it was the connection I still had to the building, or maybe it was just the intuition of a father. I sat up in my bed in the studio. I looked at my phone. No missed calls. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep. I knew the breaking point was coming. I just didn't know it would be violent. Back at the tower, Vivian looked at her daughter. We have to call him, she whispered. We have to call your father. Nia shook her head, wiping her tears. He won't come, Mom. He told me. He said we have to learn. Then we are lost, Vivian said. We are completely lost. She looked at the closed bedroom door. She realized with a terrifying clarity that Preston wasn't just staying for the money. He was staying because he had nowhere else to go either. They were 3 drowning people clinging to the same rock, and the water was rising, and the shark was already on the rock with them. They say that a building is only as strong as the ground it sits on. You can use the strongest steel and the clearest glass, but if the earth beneath you shifts, the whole structure comes down. I have spent my life studying soil composition and bedrock. I know how to anchor a skyscraper against the wind. But Preston Walsh did not believe in anchors. He believed in balloons. He believed that if you just pumped enough hot air into a market, it would rise forever. He was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday morning just 2 weeks after I left. The global markets woke up in a bad mood. A tech bubble burst in Asia, and the shockwaves rolled across the Pacific like a tsunami. I was sitting in a diner near my studio eating eggs and toast, watching the red ticker tape scroll across the television screen. The Dow Jones was down 800 points. The Nasdaq was bleeding out. I watched the numbers fall, and I felt a strange sense of calm. My money was not in the market. My money was in municipal bonds and land. Boring, slow, reliable assets. But Preston, I knew exactly where his money was. It was in high-risk derivatives and leveraged options. He was betting money he did not have on companies that did not make a profit. And when the market crashed, it did not just take his profit, it took his principal. And since he was trading on margin, it took money he owed to the brokerage. I could imagine the scene in the penthouse. The heating was still broken, so the air was frigid. Preston was likely sitting in front of his 6 monitors, wrapped in a duvet, watching his entire life savings evaporate in real time. Margin call. That is the two scariest words in the English language for a gambler. It means the casino wants its chips back right now, and if you do not have them, they take your house, your car, and your dignity. Preston did not have the chips. He had zero liquidity. The IRS had frozen the house. The bank had denied the loan. And now the brokerage firm was liquidating his positions, leaving him with a negative balance of $40,000. He was desperate, and a desperate man is a dangerous man. He looked around the apartment. He saw the ruined floor. He saw the cold fireplace. And then his eyes landed on the walls. My art collection. For 40 years I had collected the works of the Harlem Renaissance masters. I did not buy them as investments. I bought them because they spoke to me. They told the story of my people, the struggle, the beauty, the resilience. Hanging above the fireplace was my most prized possession, a painting by Jacob Lawrence titled The Builders. It depicted black men in work clothes building a city. Their hands were large and capable. Their faces were focused. It was a painting about dignity in labor. To me, it was a mirror. To Preston, it was a lottery ticket. He stood up. He threw off the duvet. He marched over to the fireplace. He did not look at the art. He looked at the signature, Jacob Lawrence. He pulled out his phone and typed the name into a search engine. His eyes widened. Recent auction results for similar works were in the six-figure range. Some even touched $1 million. I can see the greed flooding back into his eyes, replacing the panic. He thought he had found the escape hatch. He thought I had left a pile of cash hanging on the wall. He grabbed the frame. It was heavy, solid wood. He lifted it off the hook, leaving a rectangular ghost on the wallpaper where the dust had settled over decades. Nia was in the kitchen trying to boil water on the stove to make tea because the electric kettle had shorted out. She heard the noise. She came running in. "Preston, what are you doing?" she asked. "I am saving us," Preston snapped. He was frantic. He grabbed a tablecloth and wrapped the painting clumsily. "I am taking this to the auction house. Right now. This is worth $500,000, Nia. This pays off the margin call. This pays off the shark. This buys us time. But that is..." "Dad's favorite," Nia said, reaching out. "You can't take the builders. He told me that painting reminded him of his grandfather." "I don't care about his grandfather," Preston shouted, pushing past her. "I care about not getting my legs broken by a loan shark. Get out of my way!" He stormed out of the apartment, carrying my history under his arm like a stolen television. He took the elevator down. He walked past the doorman, ignoring the strange looks. He hailed a cab and gave the address of the most prestigious auction house in Chicago, a place I knew very well. I was not there to see it, but I heard every detail later from the curator, a woman named Elizabeth, who had been a friend of mine for 30 years. Preston walked into the marble lobby of the auction house. He marched up to the front desk, sweating despite the cold, sweating from fear and adrenaline. "I have a Jacob Lawrence," he announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "I want to consign it for the emergency auction tomorrow." They showed him into a private viewing room. Elizabeth came in wearing her white gloves. She saw the painting wrapped in a tablecloth and frowned. "That is not how you treat a masterpiece." Preston unwrapped it. There it was, the bold colors, the sharp angles, the undeniable genius of Lawrence. "It is real," Preston said, panting slightly. "Look at it. It is the real deal. My father-in-law, Elijah Banks, bought it in 1980. It has been in the family ever since. I want $500,000 for it, cash advance if possible." Elizabeth put on her glasses. She examined the brushwork. She examined the canvas. She nodded slowly. "It is a magnificent piece, Mr. Walsh. Truly. Elijah has a wonderful eye." Preston grinned. He thought he had won. "Great. So draw up the papers. I need the wire transfer by 5 p.m. Elizabeth stood up. She took off her glasses. "There is just one problem, Mr. Walsh." "Problem? What problem?" "It is authentic." "I do not doubt that it is the painting Elijah bought," Elizabeth said calmly. "However, in the high-end art market, provenance is everything. We cannot sell a piece of this magnitude without the certificate of authenticity and the chain of custody documentation." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "Papers. Who cares about papers? The painting is right here. You can see it." Elizabeth smiled, a polite professional smile that was colder than the wind outside. "Mr. Walsh, without the certificate of authenticity signed by the artist or the foundation, and without the original bill of sale proving legal ownership. This is just a painting. We cannot verify it is not a forgery. We cannot verify it was not stolen. It wasn't stolen, Preston yelled. It belongs to my wife. Then you have the papers? Elizabeth asked. Preston froze. He realized then that he had never seen any papers. He had just seen the pictures on the wall. Where are they? He demanded. Where does Eli keep them? Elizabeth folded her hands. Knowing Elijah, he keeps them in a secure location separate from the art. It is standard practice for serious collectors. It prevents exactly this sort of situation. Preston felt the floor tilting under his feet. So what is it worth without the papers? He asked, his voice trembling. Elizabeth shrugged. As a decorative object, maybe $500, maybe $1,000 if you find someone who likes the colors. But as an investment-grade asset, zero. We cannot touch it. Zero. The word hung in the air. Preston stared at the painting. The builders in the picture seemed to be mocking him. They were men who built things with their hands. Preston was a man who tried to steal things with his greed, and he had failed. He grabbed the painting. He didn't wrap it this time. He just grabbed it by the frame. This is ridiculous, he screamed. You are all in on it. You are protecting him. I am protecting the integrity of the market, Mr. Walsh, Elizabeth said coolly. Please leave before I call security. Preston ran out of the auction house. He stood on the sidewalk holding a $500,000 painting that was worth less than his ruined suit. He was crying. Actual tears of frustration and rage. I was finishing my eggs at the diner when my phone rang. It was Elizabeth. Eli, she said, warm and professional. Your son-in-law was just here. He had the builders. I stopped chewing. Is the painting okay? It is fine, Eli. He took it with him. I told him it was worthless without the paperwork. Thank you, Elizabeth. You know, she added softly, I have those papers in my safe here. You gave them to me for safekeeping 5 years ago. I know I said. Keep them there. I hung up. I thought about Preston standing on the sidewalk. He had the object. He had the physical thing. But he didn't have the soul of it. He didn't have the proof. That was the story of his life. He chased the appearance of wealth but missed the substance. He chased the appearance of status but lacked the character. He had the penthouse but not the warmth. He had the art but not the value. He had the wife but not the love. He was a man holding a frame with nothing inside it. I paid my bill at the diner. I left a generous tip for the waitress. Preston would be going back to the penthouse now. He would hang the painting back on the wall. But it would never look the same to him. Every time he looked at it, he would see his own failure. He was running out of options. The walls were closing in, and the only thing he had left to sell was his pride. But the market for that was crashing too. I walked out into the Tuesday afternoon. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. It was a good day, a steady day. I had built my life on bedrock. Preston had built his on sand, and the tide was coming in. There is a specific kind of knock that a father never forgets. It is not the polite rap of a neighbor borrowing sugar. It is not the confident pound of a delivery man. It is a frantic, desperate rhythm that sounds like a heart beating too fast against a rib cage. I was asleep in my studio apartment when I heard it. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Thursday. Outside, the rain had turned into a sleet that coated the streets of Chicago in gray slush. I sat up instantly. My instincts, which had been dormant for 2 weeks, woke up screaming. I walked to the door in my pajamas. I did not look through the peephole. I knew who it was. There was only one person in the world who would come to me at this hour with that kind of fear in her fist. I opened the heavy steel door. Nia was standing there. She looked like a wreckage. My daughter, the girl who had grown up in private schools in silk dresses, was shivering in a thin, soaking wet trench coat. Her hair was matted to her skull. Her expensive shoes were ruined by the slush. But I did not look at her clothes. I looked at her face. There was a bruise on her left cheek. It was dark purple and ugly, blossoming like a storm cloud under her skin. The mark of a man's hand. The mark of Preston Walsh. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was cracked and small. She did not wait for an invitation. She collapsed forward. I caught her. She was freezing cold. She smelled of rain and fear and the stale air of a house that was dying. I pulled her inside and kicked the door shut. I wanted to hold her. Every cell in my body wanted to wrap my arms around her and tell her that I would kill the man who did this. I wanted to tell her that I would fix everything, that I would write the check, pay the tax, fix the heat, and make the world soft for her again. But I stopped myself. I helped her to the small armchair near the radiator. I went to the kitchenette and poured a glass of water. My hands were shaking slightly, but I forced them to be steady. I handed her the glass. She drank it in one gulp, her teeth chattering against the rim. "I am so sorry," she sobbed. She put the glass down and looked at me with pleading eyes. "You were right, Daddy. You were right about everything. He is crazy. He hit me. He tried to sell your painting. He says it is all your fault." I stood over her. I did not sit down. I needed the distance. If I sat down, I might soften, and tonight I needed to be made of stone. "He hit you," I said quietly. My voice was dangerous but controlled. She nodded, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "He lost all the money. The stocks crashed. He tried to sell the builders, but the auction house kicked him out. He came home and he just snapped. Mom tried to stop him, but he laughed at her. Daddy, please. You have to help us." I crossed my arms. "Help you how, Nia? Come back," she begged. "Come back and talk to the IRS. Pay the tax bill. Kick Preston out. Take back the house. Mom says if you take back the title, maybe the government will forgive the penalty. We can go back to how it was. We can be a family again." I looked at her. She was 28 years old, but she was looking at me like she was 6. She thought that sorry was a magic word. She thought that if she cried hard enough, the laws of economics and consequences would suspend themselves. I walked over to the window and looked out at the brick wall of the alley. "Nia," I said, "do you remember when you were 10 years old and you broke Mrs. Gable's window with a baseball?" She blinked, confused by the question. "What?" "Yes. You paid for it. I paid for it." I agreed. "But who had to go over there and sweep up the glass? Who had to stand there and apologize while she yelled, 'I did,'" she whispered. "Exactly. I paid the money, but you did the labor. You had to feel the shame of the mistake so you would never do it again." I turned back to face her. "This is not a broken window, Nia. This is a $5 million liability. And this time, I am not paying for it." Nia's face crumbled. "But Daddy, look at me. He hit me. We have no heat. We have no food. How can you be so cruel?" "I am not being cruel," I said, moving closer to her. "I am being a father. For 28 years, I protected you from the rain. I gave you a penthouse where the weather never touched you. I gave you a husband, or I allowed you to marry one who looked the part. And what did you do with that protection? I waited." She looked down. "You used it to humiliate me," I said, my voice rising just a fraction. 2 weeks ago, you sat at that dining table. You watched that man put his feet on my furniture. You watched him mock my life's work. You watched your mother threaten to destroy my reputation with a lie. And you did nothing." I was scared she cried. "No," I corrected her. "You were greedy. You thought you were getting a windfall. You thought you were getting the kingdom without the king. You chose a husband over a father, Nia. Now you have to bear the weight of that choice." She started to cry harder, rocking back and forth. "But I made a mistake. I am sorry. I know you are sorry," I said. "And I forgive you as your father. But the IRS does not forgive. The bank does not forgive. And the structural integrity of that building does not forgive. Regret does not pay debts, Nia. Action pays debts." She looked up at me terrified. "So what are you saying? You are going to let us lose the house?" "I am saying the house is already lost," I told her brutally. "It was lost the moment you signed that paper. You just haven't accepted it yet." I went to the closet and pulled out a spare blanket and a pillow. I tossed them onto the small sofa in the corner of my studio. "You can stay here tonight," I said. "No man will ever touch you again while you are under my roof. If Preston comes within 100 feet of this building, I will put him in the hospital. You are safe here physically." Nia looked at the blanket, then at me. "And the money." "There is no money," I said firmly. "I will not pay the tax. I will not fix the heat. I will not bail out your mother. But Mom, your mother is an accomplice, Nia. She wanted the power. Now she has the bill." Nia stood up shaky on her legs. She looked around my tiny apartment, the peeling paint in the corner, the simple stove, the lack of luxury. "So this is it?" she asked bitterly. "You are just going to sit here in this dump and watch us drown?" I smiled, a sad, tired smile. "This dump is paid for, Nia. It is warm, it is clean, and it is honest. It is more of a home than that penthouse ever was." I pointed to the sofa. "Go to sleep. Tomorrow morning we are going to wake up early." "To go to the bank?" she asked with a glimmer of hope. "To go to the police station," I said. "You are going to file a report for domestic assault. You are going to get a restraining order against Preston. And then you are going to go to a staffing agency and get a job." "A job," she repeated as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Yes, a job. receptionist, waitress, cleaner, anything that pays honest money. You are going to learn how to buy your own bread, Nia. Because as long as you eat bread bought by others, you will always be a slave to their whims, whether that master is me or Preston. I walked over to her. I finally let myself touch her. I reached out and gently brushed a wet strand of hair from her face. I looked at the bruise again. It made my heart ache, but I swallowed the pain. You have a long road ahead of you, daughter. It is going to be hard. You are going to lose the jewelry. You are going to lose the fancy friends. You are going to lose the view. But if you walk this road, you might find something you never had before. What she whispered. Self-respect, I said. I turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp burning by the kitchenette. Sleep now. I went to my own bed. I lay down on my back, staring at the ceiling. I could hear Nia weeping softly into the pillow. It was a mournful sound, the sound of a child realizing that the world is not a playground. I wanted to comfort her. I wanted to write the check. It would be so easy. $2.2 million was a lot of money, but I had it. I could end her pain tomorrow. But if I did that, I would be robbing her again. I would be robbing her of the lesson. Preston was a disaster, but he was also a teacher. He was teaching her that charm is cheap and character is expensive. If I saved her now, she would go back to him, or she would find another Preston. She would never learn to stand on her own 2 feet because I would always be there to be her crutch. I closed my eyes. The image of the bruise on her cheek burned in my mind. Preston Walsh had made a mistake tonight, a fatal mistake. He had touched my blood. I would not pay his debts, but I would make sure he paid for that bruise. Tomorrow the war would shift fronts. It was no longer just about money, it was about justice. But tonight, I let my daughter cry. Tears are good. They wash away the illusions. I listened to the rain and the sobbing until they merged into a single rhythm. The rhythm of a hard reality washing over us all. Welcome to the real world, Nia, I thought. It is cold, but at least it is real. It is often said that a fish rots from the head down, but in a skyscraper the rot starts at the top and gravity takes care of the rest. When I lived in the penthouse, I treated the floor beneath my feet not as a barrier, but as a membrane. I knew that directly below my study was the master bedroom of Mr. and Mrs. Goldberg on the 39th floor. I knew that below my kitchen was the nursery of the young Suzuki family on the 38th. I walked softly. I calibrated the vibration dampeners. I ensured that the massive weight of the penthouse did not become a burden to the neighbors. But Preston Walsh walked like a giant, and he had turned off the dampeners. It started with a hairline crack in Mrs. Goldberg's ceiling, just a spiderweb fracture in the plaster. She probably thought it was settling. But then the vibrations started. Without the active hydraulic stabilization system that I had designed to counter the wind shear off Lake Michigan, the penthouse began to shudder. It was imperceptible to Preston because he was too busy feeling sorry for himself. But to the steel beams, it was torture. And that torture traveled downward. On a Friday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I left, the bill for that torture arrived. And it did not come in an envelope. It came in a box. I was at the public library in Hyde Park helping a high school student with his geometry homework. It was a simple volunteer job I had picked up to keep my mind sharp. We were calculating the hypotenuse of a triangle when my phone buzzed. It was Henry the doorman again. "Mr. Banks, it is bad. The sheriff is here." "Not the police. The sheriff. They have a warrant to serve papers on the penthouse. The board president is with them." I put my phone down. I looked at the student. "Remember this," I told him, pointing to the triangle. "If you remove the support from the longest side, the whole shape collapses. That is not just math. That is life." Back at the tower, the collapse was happening in real time. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor. Out stepped 2 sheriff's deputies, followed by the president of the condo association, a man named Arthur Sterling. Arthur was a retired corporate litigator. He was a shark who ate other sharks for breakfast. I had always gotten along with him because I respected his ruthlessness in protecting the building. Now that ruthlessness was aimed at my wife. Vivian opened the door. She looked haggard. She was wearing a bathrobe over her clothes to stay warm. The apartment behind her was dark and smelled of mildew from the unaddressed water damage. "Mrs. Banks," Arthur said. His voice was not friendly. It was the voice of a man who sees a tumor that needs to be cut out. "Arthur," she said, forcing a smile, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" "We are having some Technical difficulties with the heat, but we are working on it. Arthur did not smile back. He signaled to the deputies. One of them stepped forward and handed Vivian a stack of documents so thick it looked like a phone book. "You are being served, ma'am," the deputy said. "Served?" Vivian blinked. Served for what? For gross negligence. Breach of fiduciary duty as technical manager. And destruction of communal property, Arthur recited. Vivian dropped the heavy stack on the hallway table. Negligence, destruction. "Arthur, we just had a leak. You have compromised the structural integrity of the 39th and 38th floors," Arthur said, stepping into the foyer without invitation. He looked around at the ruin of my masterpiece with disgust. "The Goldbergs have moved out to a hotel because their ceiling is falling in chunks. The Suzuki family has reported cracks in their support pillars. We hired an independent engineer yesterday. His report is in that stack. He says the hydraulic vibration dampeners have been inactive for 21 days. The wind load is shaking the upper superstructure apart." Preston came out of the bedroom. He looked disheveled. He saw the badges and froze. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to muster some authority. Arthur looked at him like he was a stain on the carpet. "And you must be the new co-owner. Mr. Walsh, you are named in the suit as well." "Suit?" Preston laughed nervously. "You are suing us. For a few cracks, we will patch them up. Send us a bill for the plaster." Arthur laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "Plaster, Mr. Walsh. We are not suing you for plaster. We are suing you for the retrofitting of the steel skeleton of the upper third of the building. We are suing you for the relocation costs of the displaced residents. We are suing you for the diminution of property value for every unit in this tower." He paused for effect. "The class action lawsuit filed this morning by the Residents Association seeks damages in the amount of $5 million. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the steel beams holding up the roof. "$5 million, Vivian whispered. Her legs gave out. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. Preston turned purple. "You are crazy. We don't have $5 million. The building is fine. It is just Eli's stupid system acting up." Arthur leaned in close to Preston. "Exactly. It is Eli's system, and you turned it off. Ignorance is not a defense, Mr. Walsh. When you took the title, you took the responsibility. You are legally liable. And since you do not have liability insurance because I checked and your policy lapsed 3 days ago due to non-payment, we will be seeking immediate asset seizure." "Asset seizure," Preston stammered. "We have filed an emergency injunction," Arthur continued. "We are freezing all assets associated with the owners of this unit. That means your bank accounts are locked as of 9 a.m. this morning. We are also petitioning the court to force a sale of the penthouse to cover the damages." "Force a sale," Vivian cried from the floor. "You can't take my home." "It is not a home," Mrs. Banks Arthur said coldly. "It is a public safety hazard, and you are the hazard." He turned to leave. "You have 24 hours to respond. If you do not, we will move for a default judgment. I suggest you call a lawyer, a very expensive one." The deputies followed him out. The heavy door clicked shut. Inside the penthouse, the air was sucked out of the room. $5 million. They already owed $2.2 million to the IRS. They owed $200,000 for the first maintenance bill. And now this. $7.4 million of debt. They were not just broke. They were obliterated. Nia walked into the room. She had heard everything from the kitchen. She looked at her mother on the floor. She looked at her husband, who was staring at the wall, shaking. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just walked over to the stack of legal papers and opened it. She read the first page. "The People versus Vivian Banks, Preston Walsh and Nia Banks." "We are going to prison, aren't we?" she asked quietly. "Not prison," Preston muttered. "Bankruptcy. We just declare bankruptcy. It wipes it all out." Nia looked at him with pity. "You can't wipe out a lawsuit for negligence, Preston. And you can't wipe out tax debt. Daddy told me." Preston spun on her. "Stop quoting your father. If he was here, he would fix this." "But he isn't here," Nia said. "And he isn't coming." Vivian looked up. Her face was gray. "Call Miller," she rasped. "Call the lawyer." "I tried," Preston said. "He isn't answering." "He dropped us, Vivian. He knows we can't pay him." They were alone on an island of their own making, and the sharks were circling. I sat in the library looking at the geometry textbook. The student was waiting for me to check his work. I picked up my pencil. I drew a line through his equation. "Here's your mistake," I said. "You assumed the foundation was solid, but the variable changed." The student nodded. "So I have to start over." "Yes," I said. "You have to start over from zero." I looked out the window toward the city. I knew Arthur Sterling. He wouldn't stop at the lawsuit. He would go for the throat. He would make sure they were evicted. He would make sure they were humiliated. And the sad part was, I could have stopped it with a single phone call. I could have called Arthur and said, "I am coming back. Give me a week to fix the dampers." Arthur would have dropped the suit because he trusted me. But I didn't make the call. Because Vivian needed to learn that actions have consequences. She had spent 40 years thinking she was untouchable. She thought she was the Queen of Chicago. Now she was just a defendant in case number 4592. I packed up my bag. I was meeting Maya for lunch. We had paperwork to sign. I was setting up a scholarship fund for young black architects. I was using the money I had saved, the money Vivian called hoarding. I was building a legacy. She was building a ruin. As I walked to the train station, I felt the ground beneath my feet. It was solid. It was stable. Up in the tower, the floor was shaking. And for the first time in their lives, Vivian Preston and Nia were feeling every tremor. There is a specific temperature at which steel becomes brittle. If you cool it down too fast, it snaps under pressure. I was sitting in the conference room of Sterling and Associates on the 45th floor of a building I helped design in 1998. The thermostat was set to 72 degrees. It was comfortable. But for the three people sitting across the mahogany table from me, the room must have felt like a meat locker. I took a sip of my Earl Grey tea. It was hot, aromatic. I placed the porcelain cup back on the saucer with a gentle click. That click was the only sound in the room for a long time. Across from me sat what remained of my family. Vivian looked 20 years older than she had a month ago. Her hair, usually dyed and sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was showing gray roots and was pulled back in a messy bun. She was not wearing jewelry. She was wearing a simple gray sweater that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a closet. Preston Walsh sat next to her. The golden boy, the financier. He looked like a man who had been awake for a week. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room like a trapped rat looking for a hole in the baseboards. He smelled of stale sweat and peppermint gum, trying to mask the scent of fear. And then there was Nia, my daughter. She sat at the end of the table, staring at her hands. She wore dark sunglasses inside the room. I knew why. The bruise Preston had given her was fading, but the shame was still fresh. She did not look at me. She could not. Arthur Sterling, the president of the condo board and the man suing them for $5 million, sat at the head of the table. He looked bored. To him, this was just another foreclosure. To them, it was the end of the world. "Mr. Banks," Arthur said, looking at me, "thank you for coming. We are all aware of the situation. The defendants have requested this meeting to propose a settlement before we move to summary judgment and eviction." I nodded slowly. "I am listening." Vivian cleared her throat. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She took a sip of water. Her hand shook so badly that water splashed onto the polished table. Preston watched the water spread but didn't move to wipe it up. Vivian started again, her voice a raspy whisper. "We want to give it back." I raised an eyebrow. "Give what back, Vivian?" "The penthouse," she said. "The art. Everything. We made a mistake. A terrible mistake. We cannot manage the property. We cannot pay the maintenance. And we certainly cannot pay the lawsuit. We want to transfer the deed back to you. Today. Right now." She pushed a folder across the table. It was the same folder she had slapped on my dining table a month ago. The edges were dog-eared now. Preston leaned forward, his eyes desperate. "We are willing to walk away, Eli. No fight, no alimony. You take the house back and we call it even. We just want this nightmare to end." I looked at the folder. I did not touch it. I let it sit there in the middle of the table like a dead bird. "Call it even," I repeated slowly, tasting the words. "You steal my home. You insult my dignity. You destroy my floors. You damage the structural integrity of a 40-story tower. And now, because the bill has come due, you want to give it back." I leaned back in my leather chair. I am afraid you misunderstand the nature of real estate, Preston. You cannot give back a liability. You can only sell an asset. And right now, that penthouse is not an asset. It is a toxic waste dump wrapped in glass. Preston slammed his hand on the table. It is worth $5.5 million. The appraisal says so. The appraisal is from 2 months ago. I corrected him, calm as a frozen lake. That was before you flooded it. That was before you stripped the copper wiring from the smart wall to try and sell it for scrap. That was before you triggered a class action lawsuit that is attached to the deed. I looked at Arthur. What is the current market value of the unit? Arthur, considering the damages and the lien, Arthur checked his notes. Factoring in the structural repairs, the water damage remediation, the lawsuit settlement, and the unpaid taxes, the property has a negative equity of approximately $3 million. I looked back at Preston. Did you hear that, son? You don't own a $5 million house. You own a $3 million hole in the ground. And you want me to jump into it with you? Preston's face turned red. So what? You are just going to let us rot. You are going to let your wife and daughter go homeless. I looked at Nia. She flinched. I am not letting you do anything I said. You did this to yourselves. But I am a businessman, and I hate to see a good building go to waste. Vivian looked up, hope sparking in her eyes. So you will take it. I will buy it, I said. Preston let out a breath he had been holding. Okay, fine, buy it. How much? If you pay us, say, $4 million. That covers the tax and leaves us a little to start over. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time. It echoed off the glass walls. $4 million. Preston, you really are delusional, aren't you? I reached into my pocket. I pulled out my wallet. It was an old leather wallet worn smooth by years of honest work. I opened it and pulled out a single crisp banknote. I placed it on the table. On top of the folder, $1. The room went silent. Preston stared at the bill. George Washington stared back at him, judging him. $1, Preston whispered. Is this a joke? No joke, I said. That is my offer. I will purchase the property for $1. In exchange, I will assume the outstanding maintenance debt and I will settle the lawsuit with the condo board. And the tax, Vivian asked. The $2.2 million gift tax. I shook my head. No. That is your debt, Vivian. You and Preston accepted the gift. The tax belongs to you. Preston jumped up, kicking his chair back. You are trying to ruin us. You want the house for free and you want to leave us with the bill? I won't sign. I will never sign. Sit down, Preston. The voice didn't come from me. It came from the man sitting next to Preston, his lawyer, a court-appointed attorney named Mr. Davis, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Preston looked at him, shocked. Whose side are you on? I am on the side of keeping you out of federal prison, Mr. Davis said, pulling Preston back down into his chair. He looked at his client with weary eyes. Mr. Walsh, listen to me very carefully. You are currently under investigation for tax evasion. You have 0 assets. You have declared insolvency. If you do not divest yourself of this property immediately, the IRS will seize it. But they won't just seize the house. They will charge you with fraud because you tried to sell the art to pay a margin call while under a tax lien. That is a felony. Preston went pale. Felony. Mr. Davis nodded. Mr. Banks is offering you a lifeboat. A very small, very leaky lifeboat, but a lifeboat nonetheless. If you sell the property to him for $1, the transfer reverses the ownership. We can argue to the IRS that the original gift was a failed transaction. It might, I repeat might, allow us to negotiate the tax penalty down from $2 million to a settlement figure you can actually pay over the next 20 years. He looked at Eli. Mr. Banks is effectively offering to clean up your mess so you don't go to jail. He is taking the physical liability off your hands. Preston looked at the dollar bill. He looked at Vivian, who was weeping silently. He looked at Naya, who was still staring at the table. But I will have nothing, he stammered. I will be broke. You are already broke, Mr. Davis said brutally. The only question now is whether you want to be broke on the street or broke in a cell. I took a sip of tea. The liquid was cooling, but it was still good. "Take the dollar, Preston," I said softly. "It is more than you earned." Vivian reached out. Her hand was trembling. She picked up the pen. She didn't look at me. She looked at the paper. This was the same paper she had forced me to sign. Now she was signing it back. "I am sorry," she whispered. She signed. She slid the paper to Nia. Nia signed without hesitation. She wanted this over. She wanted the weight off her shoulders. Then the paper slid to Preston. He held the pen like it was a knife. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You planned this," he hissed. "You planned this from the beginning?" "I didn't plan for you to be a fool, Preston," I said. "I just counted on it." He signed. He slashed his signature across the line, tearing the paper slightly. Mr. Davis took the document. He stamped it, notarized it. "It is done," Arthur Sterling said, standing up. "The lawsuit is withdrawn contingent on Mr. Banks assuming all repair costs." I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up the folder. I did not pick up the dollar. "Keep the change," I said to Preston. I turned to leave. Eli Vivian called out, "Where are we supposed to go? We have nowhere." I stopped at the door. I looked back at them. 3 people who had had everything and thrown it away for the promise of more. "I heard there are vacancies in the city shelters," I said. "Or perhaps Preston can use his financial genius to rent you a motel room." "But Nia," Vivian pleaded. "She is your daughter." I looked at Nia. She had finally taken off her sunglasses. The bruise was yellow and purple. "Nia knows where I live," I said. "My door is open to her, alone." I looked at Preston one last time. "If you ever come near my property again, Preston, and I mean my building or my daughter, the next lawsuit won't be civil. It will be criminal." I walked out of the conference room. I walked down the long hallway to the elevator. I pressed the button. I had my home back. But it wasn't a victory lap. It was a salvage operation. I had a lot of work to do. Floors to replace, pipes to fix, a soul to cleanse. But first I had to make a call to the IRS. I had a feeling that Mr. Davis was optimistic about that tax negotiation. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I stepped into the elevator and watched the doors close on my former life. The dollar bill was still sitting on the table. The most expensive dollar Preston Walsh would ever earn. The sound of a pen scratching against paper can be louder than a jackhammer if you listen closely enough. In that silent conference room, the sound of Preston Walsh signing away my penthouse for a single dollar echoed like a gavel striking a block. He signed with a flourish, a sharp, jagged scrawl that tore through the fiber of the paper. He dropped the pen and sat back. He exhaled a long, shaky breath. And then right before my eyes, I watched the transformation happen. The fear that had been gripping him for weeks evaporated. The humility that had forced him to beg disappeared. In its place, the old arrogance came rushing back like floodwater filling a dry trench. He looked at the signed contract. Then he looked at me, and he smiled. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a smile of triumph. "Well," he said, adjusting his cuffs and sitting up straighter. "That is that. You have your precious pile of bricks back, Eli. I hope you enjoy fixing the plumbing." He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "You know, in a way, you did us a favor. That place was a curse. Now I am free. I have 0 debt. I have a clean slate. I can go back to trading. I can rebuild." He looked at Vivian, who was still wiping tears from her eyes. "Stop crying, Vivian. We are out. We survived." Eli took the bait. He took the liability. I sat there perfectly still. My hands were folded on the table. I watched him gloat. I watched him rewrite history in his head. 5 minutes ago, he was terrified of prison. Now he thought he had outsmarted me. He thought he had dumped a toxic asset onto a sentimental old man. He stood up. He smoothed down his wrinkled suit jacket. "Come on, Nia," he commanded, snapping his fingers at my daughter. "Let's go. We have to find a hotel. And then I need a drink. A real drink. Not this cheap tea." He looked at me one last time, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Thanks for the dollar, Pops. I will frame it." As a reminder of the day I unloaded a sinking ship on its captain. He reached for the dollar bill on the table. "Leave it," I said. My voice was soft, but it stopped his hand in midair. Preston sneered. "Why, it is my money. I earned it." I looked at Maya, my attorney, who had been sitting silently next to me this whole time. She was the best student I ever taught. She understood structures. She understood that a trap isn't sprung until the mouse tries to leave with the cheese. "Maya," I said, "would you please explain the relevant tax statutes of the state of Illinois and the Federal Revenue Code to Mr. Walsh?" Preston frowned. "Tax statutes? What do you mean?" "The deal is done. You bought the house, you bought the debt. Mr. Davis said so." He looked at his court-appointed lawyer. Mr. Davis was looking down at his shoes, suddenly finding his laces very interesting. Maya opened her leather portfolio. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. She didn't look at Preston. She looked at the signed contract. "Mr. Walsh." Maya began, her voice crisp and professional. "You are correct that by selling the property to Mr. Banks for $1, you have transferred the physical asset and the attached structural liens back to him. The condo board lawsuit is settled. The maintenance fees going forward are his responsibility." Preston spread his hands. "Exactly. That is what I said. I am free." Maya raised a finger. "However, there seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding regarding the nature of your tax liability with the IRS." Preston froze. His smile faltered. "What misunderstanding?" Maya continued reading from the code. "The gift tax liability of $2.2 million was triggered on the date of the original transfer. That was 30 days ago. At that moment, the IRS assessed the tax based on the value of the gift received by you and Mrs. Walsh. That tax event is a historical fact. It is a debt incurred by the recipient." She looked up at him. Her eyes were sharp. "Selling the asset today does not retroactively cancel the tax event of last month. You cannot return a gift to the giver to erase the tax owed on receiving it. The IRS does not work like a department store return counter." "Mr. Walsh." Preston's mouth opened. He looked at Mr. Davis. "Is that true?" Mr. Davis cleared his throat. "Well, technically, yes. The tax attaches to the person who incurred it. The debt is personal. It follows your social security number, not the house." Preston blinked. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he was fainting. "Wait," he stammered. "Wait a minute. You mean, even though I don't own the house anymore, I still owe the tax on it?" "Correct," Maya said. "You owe the Internal Revenue Service $2.2 million plus interest and penalties. The fact that you sold the asset for $1 is irrelevant to them. In fact, it makes it worse." "Worse?" Preston squeaked. "Yes," Maya said calmly. "Because you just disposed of your only significant asset for less than fair market value while owing a federal debt. The IRS considers that a fraudulent conveyance. They will not only come for the $2 million, they will likely garnish your future wages for the rest of your life." The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. Vivian let out a low moan. She understood. Finally, she understood. "We don't have the house," she whispered, "and we still owe the money." Maya nodded. "You have the debt. Mr. Banks has the deed." "No!" Preston screamed. He lunged for the contract on the table. "No! I revoke it. Tear it up!" I was faster. I placed my hand over the document. It was a hand that had laid bricks and welded steel. It was heavy. "It is notarized, Preston," I said. "It is legal. It is done." Preston fell back into his chair. He looked like a man who had been shot. He looked at his hands. He looked at the dollar bill. You tricked me," he gasped. "You knew this. You knew I would still owe the tax." "I didn't trick you, Preston," I said, standing up slowly. "I let you walk into the trap you built. You were so desperate to get rid of the maintenance bills, so desperate to run away from the work that you forgot to check the exit." I picked up the contract. I folded it carefully and put it in my inside pocket next to my heart. "You wanted to be a big shot, Preston. You wanted to play in the big leagues. Well, this is how the big leagues work. You pay for your mistakes. But I have nothing," he wailed. "I am bankrupt." "Then I suggest you start working," I said. "I hear the construction industry is hiring. Unskilled labor pays $15 an hour. If you work hard for the next 400 years, you might pay off the interest." I looked at Vivian. She was staring at me with a look of absolute horror. She realized that she had not only lost her home, but she was shackled to a corpse. She was joint debtor with a man she now despised. "Eli, please," she begged. "You can't do this." I walked over to the table. I picked up the dollar bill. I walked around to where Preston was sitting. He was slumped overhead in his hands, sobbing. I placed the dollar bill on his shoulder. I told you to keep the change, I said. You are going to need it for the bus fare. Come on, Maya. We have a ceiling to fix. I walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard the sounds of a family disintegrating. I heard Vivian screaming at Preston. I heard Preston throwing a chair against the wall. I heard Nia crying softly. But I didn't stop. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. I felt a weight lift off my chest. The kind of weight you don't realize you are carrying until it is gone. I had my building back. It was damaged. It was scarred. It would take me a year and $1 million of my own savings to repair the rot they had caused. But it was mine. And the rot that had been infecting my family, the greed, the entitlement, the arrogance, I had cut it out. I had excised it with the precision of a surgeon. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in. Maya looked at me. That was brutal Eli. I looked at the floor indicator numbers counting down. Brutal no Maya. Brutal is working in a steel mill for 30 years to buy a home for your family only to have them tell you that you are not good enough to live in it. Brutal is watching your daughter get hit by a man who thinks he owns her. I adjusted my tie. This wasn't brutality. This was an eviction. And the tenants left a mess. But I have cleaned up worse. The doors opened to the lobby. The sun was shining through the glass doors. It was a bright, cold Chicago day. I walked out into the street. I hailed a cab. To the Millennium Tower, please, I told the driver. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. Nice building. Do you live there? I smiled. Yes, I said. I am the technical manager, and I have some work to do. The lobby of the Millennium Tower smells of white tea and polished marble. It is a scent I chose myself 20 years ago when I designed the ventilation system. For the last month, that scent had been tainted by the presence of lawyers and the stench of desperation. But as I walked through the revolving doors that afternoon, the air felt clean again. Henry was standing at his post. He looked tired. He had spent weeks dealing with Preston's tantrums and Vivian's demands. When he saw me, his back straightened. He didn't say a word. He just nodded and held the door open a little wider than usual. That nod said everything. It said, "Welcome back." It said the captain is back on the bridge. I took the elevator up alone. The ride to the 40th floor takes exactly 45 seconds. I spent those seconds closing my eyes and listening to the hum of the cables. For weeks I had felt unmoored like a ship drifting at sea. Now I could feel the gravity of my home pulling me back. The doors opened with a soft chime. The penthouse was a disaster zone. There is no other way to describe it. It was freezing cold. The air inside was heavy with the smell of wet wool and stagnant water. The beautiful herringbone floors I had laid by hand were cupped and warped, rising like waves in a storm. The walls were streaked with moisture. The expensive Italian furniture was ruined. It looked like a war zone, and in a way it was. This was the battlefield where greed had fought against reality, and reality had won. I walked to the main console in the hallway. It was dark and lifeless. A layer of dust had settled on the black glass screen. I wiped it clean with my handkerchief. I could feel the cold emanating from the electronics. The system had been dormant for 30 days, waiting for a command that Preston and Vivian did not know how to give. I pressed my hand against the screen. It flickered to life, displaying the same red warning message I had left behind. System locked. Manual override required. I typed in the code. Not the emergency reset code this time. The restoration code. 1978. The year I bought the building. 01. The number of dollars I had paid to get it back. I pressed enter. For a second, nothing happened. The silence was absolute, and then deep within the walls, I heard it. A low, thrumming sound. It started in the mechanical room and spread through the ceiling. It was the sound of the hydraulic pumps engaging. System rebooting, the screen read, restoring environmental controls. The harsh white emergency lights flickered and died, replaced by the warm amber glow of the architectural lighting I had designed to mimic the sunset. The motorized shades on the south wall, which had been stuck open, exposing the room to the elements, began to move. They slid shut with a smooth, confident hiss, sealing the wound in the building's side. I felt a vibration under my feet. The radiant heating system was cycling on, pushing hot fluid through the veins of the floor. The cold air began to circulate, pushed out by the fresh, warm air from the vents. The house was taking its first breath in a month. I walked into the living room. I stepped over a puddle of water near the sofa. I would have to rip this floor out. I would have to replace the drywall. I would have to sand the beams. It would cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of labor. But as I stood there watching the city lights flicker on through the glass, I didn't care about the cost. I cared about the rescue. The building was safe. The parasite had been removed. I walked to the window and looked down. 40 stories below the drama was finding its final act. I could see the flashing lights of police cars parked in the circular driveway. I couldn't hear the sirens through the triple-paned glass, but I knew why they were there. Preston Walsh was not going to be homeless. The state of Illinois was going to provide him with a room, a very small concrete room. I learned the details later from Arthur Sterling. Apparently trying to sell my painting was just the tip of the iceberg. When the IRS started digging into Preston's finances after the tax lien was filed, they found a labyrinth of wire fraud. He had been running a Ponzi scheme. He had been using new investors' money to pay off gambling debts. He had forged documents. He had embezzled from his previous firm. The officers found him in the lobby trying to sneak out the back entrance with a suitcase full of silverware he had stolen from my kitchen. I watched from my high tower as they let him out. He was still wearing his expensive suit, but without a tie, he looked small. He was shouting something, probably blaming me, blaming Vivian, blaming the world. A detective pushed his head down to protect it as they shoved him into the back of the squad car. The car drove away, disappearing into the river of traffic. Preston Walsh had wanted to live in the sky. Now he was going to live in a cage. He had traded his freedom for the illusion of wealth, and when the illusion shattered, the bars were all that remained. Vivian's departure was less dramatic, but perhaps more tragic. She didn't go to jail. Being foolish is not a crime, only a tragedy. But she had no money. Her accounts were frozen by the lawsuit judgments and the tax lien. She had no income, and she had no husband to bail her out. I had offered to pay for a moving truck. It was the last act of charity I would ever show her. She took only her clothes and a few personal items. The furniture, the art, the jewelry, it was all sold or seized. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a subsidized housing complex on the far west side. It was a clean building, but it was stark. Linoleum floors, fluorescent lights, a view of a parking lot. I never visited her. But I heard from Nia that Vivian spends her days sitting by the window telling anyone who will listen that she used to be the queen of the Millennium Tower. She tells the neighbors that her husband cheated her, that she is a victim of a cruel legal system. She clings to that story because it is the only thing she has left. If she let go of the lie, she would have to face the truth, and the truth is too heavy for her to carry. And then there was Nia. My daughter did not go with her mother, and she did not ask to come back to the penthouse. The night after the settlement meeting, Nia came to my studio to pick up her things. She looked different. She had cut her hair short. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater. She looked like the girl she was before the money, and the pretension poisoned her. "I got a job, Dad," she told me standing in the doorway. "Oh," I asked. "We're at a dental office in the Loop. I am the receptionist. I answer phones and file charts. It pays $18 an hour." I nodded. "It is honest work." "It is," she said. "And I found a roommate, a girl from college. We are renting a small walk-up in Logan Square. It is not much, but I can pay my half." She hesitated. She looked at her hands. "The IRS contacted me. Because Preston is going to jail, the debt falls on me. They are garnishing my wages. 20% of every paycheck for the next 20 years. I felt a pang of sorrow in my chest. 20 years of debt for a mistake she made in 1 minute. "I can help with that," I started to say. "No," Nia interrupted me. Her voice was firm. "No, Dad. You were right. If you pay it, I will never learn. I signed the paper. I carry the debt. Every time I see that deduction on my paycheck, I will remember who I am, and I will remember never to let anyone buy me again." She looked up at me. Her eyes were clear. "I am proud of you, Nia," I said, and I meant it. She hugged me then. It wasn't the desperate, clinging hug of the night she ran away. It was a strong hug, a hug between two adults. "I will come for Sunday dinner," she asked. "The door is always open," I said. "But bring your own wine. The cellar is empty." She laughed. It was a real laugh. After she left, I went back to the penthouse. I spent the next year restoring it. I didn't hire a contractor. I put on my overalls and I did the work myself. I ripped up the rotten floorboards. I sanded the walls. I recalibrated the sensors. Every nail I drove was a reclamation. Every layer of paint was a healing. I kept the damage in one corner of the study, a small section of water-stained wood near the window. I sealed it with clear varnish, but I didn't fix it. I kept it as a reminder that even the strongest structures can fail if you don't maintain them. I am 72 years old now. I live alone in a 5,000 square foot glass castle in the sky. Some people say it is too big for one man. They say I should sell it and move to Florida, but I will never sell this building. It is not just a house, it is a monument. It stands as a testament to the fact that dignity cannot be bought and it cannot be stolen. It must be built brick by brick, day by day. Sometimes I sit on the terrace on windy nights. I listen to the wind howling against the glass. I feel the building sway gently beneath my feet. Most people would be terrified, but I am not. I know the steel is strong. I know the foundation is deep. And I know that as long as I am the captain of this ship, it will weather any storm. I take a sip of my Earl Grey tea. The city of Chicago spreads out below me, a grid of lights and lives. Somewhere down there, Vivian is watching TV in a lonely room. Somewhere down there, Preston is sitting in a cell. And somewhere down there, Nia is sleeping tired from a day of honest work. We are all exactly where we deserve to be. And the heating system. It is working perfectly, 72 degrees. Not a degree more, not a degree less, just the way I like it. They say that the higher you go, the colder it gets. For 40 years I believed that. I lived in this penthouse surrounded by glass and steel, feeling a chill that no heating system could fix. I thought it was the altitude. I thought it was the wind off Lake Michigan. But standing here tonight, 71 years old, leaning against the railing of my balcony with the wind in my face, I realized I was wrong. The cold wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from the inside. It was coming from the empty conversations, the calculated affections, and the silent judgments that filled these rooms. Now the wind is just wind. It is crisp. It is clean. And for the first time in decades, I am warm. The sun is setting over the city of Chicago. From up here, the grid of streets looks like a circuit board pulsing with energy. I can see the amber snake of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. I can see the dark expanse of the water. I used to look at this view and worry. I worried about the maintenance costs. I worried about the mortgage. I worried about whether the windows were clean enough for Vivian's guests. I worried about whether the decor was modern enough for Preston's taste. I was a caretaker of a museum where I wasn't allowed to touch the exhibits. But tonight the museum is closed, and the home is open. I turned away from the view and walked back into the living room. The restoration is not finished yet. There are still patches of bare drywall where I had to cut out the rot. The floor in the corner is still plywood waiting for the new oak planks to arrive. To some it might look like a construction site. To me, it looks like potential. It looks like honest work. I walked to the kitchen. The marble island, which used to be covered in Vivian's glossy magazines and Preston's expensive gadgets, was now covered in something far more valuable. Boxes of pizza. Not the artisanal kind with truffle oil that we used to order to impress people, but the deep dish greasy kind from the place on the corner, the kind that tastes like Chicago. Next to the pizza were 6 bottles of beer, cold, cheap, and refreshing. I wasn't eating alone. The buzzer rang. I walked to the intercom. "Mr. Banks." Henry, the doorman's voice, came through warm and relaxed. "The guys are here. Should I send them up?" "Send them up, Henry," I said, "and lock the desk. You're coming too." I smiled. Tonight was chess night. For years I had wanted to host a chess night, but Vivian wouldn't allow it. She said my friends were too loud. She said they didn't fit the aesthetic of the penthouse. She said, "Eli, why do you want to hang out with a retired plumber and a high school history teacher when we could be dining with the board of directors?" She never understood. The board of directors wanted my money. The plumber and the teacher wanted my time. The elevator chimed. The doors opened and out stepped Marcus, Sam, and Henry. Marcus was holding a chessboard he had carved himself. Sam was carrying a bag of pretzels. Henry was out of his uniform wearing a simple polo shirt. They walked in, not with the hesitant reverence that Vivian's guests used to have, but with the comfortable swagger of men entering a friend's house. "Whoa," Eli Marcus said, looking at the plywood on the floor. "Remodeling again. Or did you just decide the rustic look is in?" I laughed. "A little bit of both, Marcus. We had a bit of a flood, but we're rebuilding. Stronger this time." Sam walked over to the window. Man, look at that view. You know, in 40 years, I think this is the first time I've actually stood right up against the glass. Usually I was afraid I'd break something. Break it, I said, handing him a beer. It's just glass. It can be replaced. We sat down. We didn't sit on the imported Italian sofas because those were gone. We sat on folding chairs I had bought at the hardware store. And let me tell you, those metal chairs were more comfortable than anything I had sat on in this room before, because I didn't have to worry about scratching them. We opened the pizza, we opened the beers, and we started to play. The sound of the chess pieces clicking against the board was a rhythm I had missed. The trash talk flowed easily. We argued about sports, we argued about politics, we laughed until our sides hurt. I looked around the room. It wasn't perfect, it was scarred, it was messy, but it was alive. For so long I had thought that peace meant silence. I thought that a peaceful home was one where there were no arguments, no noise, no disruptions. I had walked on eggshells to keep that peace. I had signed checks to keep that peace. I had swallowed my pride to keep that peace. But that wasn't peace. That was suppression. Real peace is noise. It's the sound of friends laughing. It's the sound of a daughter telling you about her day at a job she hates but is proud to have. It's the sound of your own voice speaking your truth without fear of retribution. I took a sip of beer and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw an old man. My hair was white, my face was lined, but my shoulders were unburdened. I thought about Preston. Right now he was probably sitting in a cell surrounded by men who didn't care about his stock portfolio or his silk suits. He was learning the hard way that when you strip away the assets, all you are left with is your character. And his account was overdrawn. I thought about Vivian. I hoped in a way that she would find some peace in her small apartment. Maybe without the pressure of maintaining a kingdom, she could finally learn to be a person. But that wasn't my project anymore. I had retired from the job of fixing people who didn't want to be fixed. Checkmate, Marcus announced, slamming his rook down. I looked at the board. He had me. I was cornered. You got me, I admitted. Marcus grinned. You're rusty Eli. You spent too much time worrying about the castle and not enough time protecting the king. I looked at the king piece. It was just a piece of wood. But Marcus was right. I smiled. You're right. But I'm learning. The night went on. The city lights twinkled below us. The wind howled outside, banging against the glass, trying to get in. But the seals held. The pressure held. I stood up and walked back to the balcony door. I opened it just a crack. The rush of air hit me. It was cold, bracing alive. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even angry anymore. I felt a profound sense of lightness. It was the feeling of a surgeon who has successfully removed a tumor. The recovery would be long. There would be scars. But the sickness was gone. I looked back at my friends. Hey, Eli, Sam called out. You playing the next round, or are you going to stare at the moon all night? I'm playing, I said. I'm definitely playing. I closed the door. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I am Elijah Banks. I am a father. I am a friend. I am an architect. And for the first time in my life, I am home. The game is just beginning. And this time I make the moves. Dignity is not a loud voice. It is a quiet boundary. We often think that holding on to things houses heirlooms or toxic relationships proves our strength. But true power lies in the ability to walk away with empty hands but a full soul. When you allow disrespect to sit at your table, you are feeding the beast that will eventually eat you. Elijah taught us that the most expensive asset isn't a penthouse in the sky, but the peace of mind that comes from knowing your own worth. Let them keep the keys. You keep your crown. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that self-respect is worth more than any bank account, please hit that like button. It helps us share these important lessons with more people. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. What would you have done in Eli's shoes? Would you have given them the $1, or would you have let them sink? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, remember, your peace is expensive. Don't let anyone buy it on a discount. Stay strong.